Chapter 719. The Skywings and Abantiheim were not products of this planet, which meant that they were actually stowaways. As the thugs of the restraining power, the crown servants were there to deal with these stowaways. However, with the relationship between Wuming and the restraining power, how could the restraining power attack Wuming? Furthermore, the first Hassan had aimed at Wuming, so Wuming did not understand what was going on. However, after hearing the first Hassan's next words, Wuming understood. However, the blade has already been unsheathed. There is no second strike. To put it simply, the first Hassan had let go of the Skywings and Abantiheim. So, in other words, Wuming had taken the punishment on behalf of the Skywings and Abanti. Wuming, who had figured it out, sighed, and the anger in his heart dissipated. Now, the world was in a state of burning humanity, and the restraining power, Alea, was definitely not in a good state. The first Hassan might have been sent out to help Chaldea save humanity. The first Hassan's mission was to find out about the abnormalities, and the Skywings and Abanti as stowaways were definitely one of the abnormalities, which was the so-called violation of destiny. Destiny was an established fact. Originally, there were no such conspicuous existences like Abanti and the Skywings in history, so this was considered a violation of destiny. Take the Lionheart King, who was currently in the Holy City, as an example. She had replaced the Lionheart King to rule the Holy City, which was considered a change of fate, and could also be considered as taking over the Lionheart King's destiny. Since Wu Ming's side was considered to have gone against the will of the heavens, then wouldn't Ramses II's side also be considered to have gone against the will of the heavens? That was very likely. Wu Ming recalled some details about Ramses II. When Ramses II and Wu Ming were talking, Ramses II had been holding his head, and his neck gave Wu Ming a feeling that something was wrong. He did not think much of it at first, but now that he thought about it, Wu Ming felt that something was wrong. Could it be that Ramses II had already been beheaded by the first Hassan, and it was even his head? After seeing the first Hassan's stealth and assassination ability, Wu Ming had no doubt that he could successfully infiltrate Ramses II's temple. The reason why Ramses II was not dead was probably due to the temple's blessing. The lunar residence in that world, Wu Ming, was Wu Ming's temple. Although the size of the temple wasn't large, Wu Ming couldn't be killed if he was inside the temple, just like how Ramses II couldn't be killed in his own temple. With this series of speculations, Wu Ming was now more and more suspicious of Ramses II, wondering if he had also been beheaded by the first Hassan. Ramses II did not die because of the temple, but why was Wu Ming fine after being beheaded by the first Hassan without the temple? Wu Ming's doubts were almost solved. It stood to reason that Wu Ming's spiritual base did not have the instant immunity effect of his root of origin. Even if his arm was cut off from the point of instant death, he would die as long as he touched it. Therefore Wu Ming should have left by now. But Wu Ming was fine. Wu Ming looked at his severed arm. The severed arm had turned into magic power and dissipated, and the wound on Wu Ming's severed arm had stopped bleeding, but that was not the point. The point was that Wu Ming did not feel any aura of death on his severed arm. Wu Ming could even use magic power to condense a new arm. Let's do it. Wu Ming thought so, and magic power surged at the severed arm. In just a few seconds, a new arm reappeared. Sure enough, looking at his newly grown arm, Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan, who was surrounded by shadows. Is it the decision of the restraining power or your own will? Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan. Wu Ming's question was very simple. Did the restraining power give the order to be merciful, or did the first Hassan choose not to let Wu Ming leave? This is the instruction of the evening bell and also my will. The instruction of the evening bell was definitely the restraining power. That was the difference. Ramses II's head was cut off. Thinking about it, the first Hassan did not use the instant death power when he attacked Ramses II. There were many ways to make a servant leave, such as lack of magic power, master leaving, shattering the heart, spirit core, and head, and so on. Generally speaking, as long as the servant's head was gone, even if the spirit core was intact, they would leave unless they had special abilities. This was the case for Ramses II. The great shrine of Ramses II allowed him to survive after his head was cut off and did not leave. However, this was also thanks to the first Hassan not using the instant death power, which allowed Ramses II to have the opportunity to use the great shrine to extend his life. The first Hassan, who believed in the saying, "Once the sword is out of the scabbard, there is no second sword," did not attack Ramses II again. On the other hand, Wu Ming remembered clearly that the first Hassan's attack was on his body. Because Wu Ming dodged, it led to Wu Ming's arm being cut off. Although cutting off the body was not much better than cutting off the head, one must know that compared to other parts of the body, it was the most difficult place to cut off. After all, the connection point between the arm, head, and other parts of the body was very small, so the first Hassan was actually just cutting off the head. He actually did not expect that Wu Ming could detect his attack and avoid it. Worthy of the name of the legendary dragon. The first Hassan thought so in his heart. Chapter 720. The silver arm can't save the white man, you still need to save him. Wu Ming was taken aback, then frowned. White man? Silver arm? There was no doubt that these two were referring to two different people. As for the pure white man, Wu Ming could still guess who it was. It was the pure white lion king who now occupied the holy city, Artoria Pendragon. It wasn't Wu Ming who thought so. Ramses II also called the lion king Artoria, who was currently in the holy city that way. But who was the silver arm? Wu Ming didn't remember the silver arm among the people he knew, or was it someone Artoria knew? The people related to Artoria were only those, the Knights of the Round Table, Merlin, Morgan Le Fay, and so on. But Wu Ming, as the person who accompanied Artoria for most of her life, was naturally familiar with the people Artoria was familiar with. But none of these people were related to the silver arm. Silver arm. Arm. Wait. Wu Ming suddenly thought of something. From the information obtained by Wu Ming so far, only 3 Knights of the Round Table did not respond to Artoria's summon. Villo there answered, Galahad, and Bedivere. Villo was Wu Ming himself, so it was normal that he couldn't be summoned. Galahad was attached to Matthew, so naturally he couldn't respond to the summon. Bedivere, who was quite loyal to Artoria, also didn't respond to Artoria's summon, which was undoubtedly a big doubt. And Bedivere had a big characteristic as a Knight of the Round Table. He had a broken arm. Among the Knights of the Round Table, only Bedivere had a relationship with the arm. And when he was in the Uruk Singularity, Wu Ming once talked with Merlin. Through the conversation, Wu Ming learned that Merlin was actually very clear about the 6th Singularity where Wu Ming was now. After all, he had clairvoyance. And the fact that Artoria was in this singularity was revealed by Merlin. Otherwise, Wu Ming wouldn't know that Artoria was here. Still, through the conversation, Wu Ming vaguely learned from Merlin that Merlin was not doing nothing. He had foreshadowed something. As for what the foreshadowing was, unfortunately, Merlin either changed the topic or shook his head mysteriously and refused to say it. Maybe Bedivere was that foreshadowing. But what the truth was, he still had to wait until the truth came out. After ending his inner thoughts, Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan, who was standing in the same place and leaning on his greatsword like a crutch. The first Hassan came to tell me all this. I will remember it in my heart. I will consider going to the holy city again. Wu Ming didn't give up the idea of going to the holy city to stop Artoria. Because of the oath, Wu Ming chose to temporarily leave the holy city and go to the desert to seize the Holy Grail. Fortunately, he met Gadotsi and her party on the way. As a result, his goal of helping Gadotsi repair the singularity as soon as possible was half completed. One was to find Gadotsi, and the other was to complete the goal. The former had been completed, and the latter was almost done. After all, Wu Ming had already taken the Holy Grail back. After Gadotsi accompanied Matthew to solve Galahad's wish, Wu Ming would give the Holy Grail to Chaldea and begin to repair the singularity. But after knowing that Artoria seemed to be hiding something from Wu Ming, coupled with the fact that the first Hassan personally came to remind him, Wu Ming decided to stay in this singularity for a while. Don't say too much. This is my thanks. The first Hassan responded to Wu Ming in a brief and simple tone as if saying goodbye. Then, accompanied by a black fog, the first Hassan disappeared. At the same time, the dark and gloomy feeling in the room also disappeared. The eyes of every skywing species in their room also changed from scarlet eyes of sword runes to golden eyes of sword and shield. All the skywing species calmed down. Abent, who used the entire floating tree as his body, also relaxed. Wu Ming could clearly feel that Abent's magic power had stabilized a lot. As expected of the Hassan of the Hassans, the assassin of the assassins, with the existence of the crown spiritual base, Wu Ming could not help but exclaim. To be honest, just this aura that even Wu Ming could not detect was enough to show how powerful the first Hassan was. However, if Ramses II were to see this scene, he would probably change his opinion of Wu Ming. Look at Wu Ming. He could even vaguely detect the crown assassin and was able to dodge the opponent's attack. Although he did not dodge, at least he moved. Unlike him, he did not even know that his head had been chopped off. If not for the first Hassan showing himself at the end, Ramses II probably would not have known who had attacked him. If not for the fact that Wu Ming had met Ramses II and had a little understanding of him, Wu Ming might have attributed Ramses II's obedience to fear after being cut by the first Hassan. However, it was precisely because Wu Ming had met Ramses II and understood his character that he did not think so. How could a guy like Gilgamesh know how to write the word fear? This king-like courage was what Wu Ming appreciated. Just as Wu Ming was thinking about whether to immediately go to the holy city, the first Hassan's voice suddenly came from the void. I have cut off thy foreign heir, and the armor of refutation shall return. This was undoubtedly the divine ability of the first Hassan. Having seen it before, Wu Ming was not frightened and instead nodded in understanding. Instead, it was the Skywing species and Abant who were startled by the sudden turn of events from the first Hassan and collectively entered battle mode. This made them smile helplessly and gratifyingly. They were indeed no match for the first Hassan, but for the safety of their master they would still stand up. The loyalty of the Skywing species was vividly displayed. Previously, when Wu Ming's arm was cut off by the first Hassan, almost all the Skywings woke up from their standby slumber and rushed toward Wu Ming. The reason it was because Jillian did not come. Logically speaking, although Jillian would definitely be the first to come in such a situation, there was no sign of Jillian this time. In truth, it was mainly because Jillian was still in a deep slumber and recovering from the previous incident. It was similar to a protective device in a human body. Jillian was severely lacking in magic power and was recovering, so she might not be able to wake up even if she wanted to. It was the same principle as how humans would fall into a coma after losing large amounts of blood. Not bothering with Jillian, Wu Ming walked out of the room. Now that all the Skywings were awake, he had to go and comfort them so they could sleep. Otherwise, even if they were in a non-combat state, Wu Ming was afraid that their berserk state would devour their rationality. However, when he thought about the number of Skywings, Wu Ming felt his stomach ache. I'll just treat it as training. Chapter 721. The Skywings had fallen asleep, but it was not Wu Ming who pacified them one by one. After all, this was Abanthi's body, and with Abanthi's help, Wu Ming had successfully experienced what it was like to be a leader. Abanthi sent a collective message to the Skywings to pacify them. However, this time the Skywings were more like sleep than standby. Because it was Wu Ming who had personally gone to comfort the Skywings, he had asked them to lie down on the bed like ordinary girls instead of floating in the air and waiting for an opportunity. Although the Skywings did not quite understand this behavior, it was still an order from their master, so they still obeyed. Lying on the bed, the Skywings entered a standby state, but to an outsider they really did look like they were asleep. Back in the monitoring room, Wu Ming sat on the sofa and browsed through a large magic screen in front of him. The screen displayed the basic data of the Skywings. Although Abanthi did not really have modern technological knowledge, its magical knowledge was pretty good. Thus, it displayed the basic data of the Skywings in the form of a magic screen to Wu Ming. Although as the master of these tens of thousands of Skywings, Wu Ming could see the information of their servants, Wu Ming could not look at every Skywing one by one. With the idea of slacking off, when the Skywings were summoned, Wu Ming only looked at their ranks. The information that Abanthi had prepared for Wu Ming was a great help to Wu Ming. Because the information of ordinary Skywing race servants was the same, Abant collected the information of those Skywing race servants into a sample and took it out. Unless it was a Skywing with a special skill, the information would not be listed separately. Thus, the screen in front of Wu Ming only had the information of a few servants. After browsing for some time, Wu Ming turned off the virtual screen in front of him and leaned back on the sofa. He crossed one hand and rubbed his forehead with the other. Sure enough, Berserker's spirit base has too much of an effect on the Skywings. According to the information provided by Abanthi, the Skywings summoned by Berserker had an EX Berserker rank. What did an EX Berserker mean? Either they were crazy to the extreme and could communicate with others, or they could not communicate at all, not even with their master. One was the extreme of the positive side, and the other was the extreme of the negative side. It was clear that the Skywings had the extreme of the negative side. To put it simply, if the battle went on for a little longer, the Skywings might not be able to control themselves just like Gopro. There was even a high chance that they would break from their master's control, which meant that they might break free from Wu Ming's control or not listen to him. As a result, the Skywing species became expendable because once they were used, they would lose control. This was something Wu Ming didn't want to see. Fortunately, Azrael was different from the other Skywings. As the commander of the Skywings, Azrael had the ability to resist Berserk. Thus, Wu Ming did not have to worry that Azrael would go Berserk over at Gadatsi's place. However, the other Skywings were not so lucky. According to the information provided by the servants, the Skywings that had gone berserk were of little value. In that case, the Skywings can't move freely, Wuming muttered to himself. However, as the original individual, Azrael, and the foreign individual, Gopril, could still move. Azrael had a special skill which allowed her to move freely. As for Gopril, Wuming decided that once she woke up, he would have her follow him. With Wuming by his side, Wuming did not feel that Gopril would go out of control. Wuming could stop Gopril the moment he saw her lose her rationality. In the worst-case scenario, he could use Annihilation Lock to restrain her again. The reason why he did not bring the other Skywings was that Gopril also had a special skill. As the strongest foreign individual, Gopril had a skill that greatly strengthened her damage. In other words, Gopril's Skystrike was much stronger than the other Skystrikes of the other Skywings in terms of explosion range, power, and release speed. In fact, because of the skill, Gopril's mana consumption was much lower than the other Skywings. Facing an existence like Gopril, Wuming had no reason not to bring her along. This reason also explained why Wuming had chosen to have Gopril follow him. It was not because she was a foreign individual and had special privileges, but because she had a special skill. Because she was a foreign individual, she was powerful. And because she was powerful, her character was also extraordinary. It was precisely because of her extraordinary character that she had a special skill that was different from the other Skywings. Servants were the clones of heroic spirits, and heroic spirits were a kind of spiritual existence that was a combination of the human spirit and historical legends. This meant that the abilities of heroic spirits did not only rely on their own abilities, but also their inheritance. For example, take a servant that Wuming had once met, the Assyrian Empress Semiramis. The noble phantasm she used in Tuliphas was the Hanging Garden of Babylon, a noble phantasm that was sublimated from the essence of the Hanging Garden, a miracle building that had disappeared. The Hanging Garden of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world, was not actually created by Semiramis. Its actual creator was actually Nebuchadnezzar II. It was precisely because of this that it was called the Hanging Garden of Babylon. It could be said that the Hanging Garden of Babylon had nothing to do with her, but because it was rumored in later generations that she had created the Hanging Garden of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Hanging Garden of Babylon, was combined with Semiramis. The Vain Garden of Babylon, Hanging Garden of Babylon, a noble artifact, came into being. The Skywings had not died, were not humans, and had no connection with the human spirit, but they had legends. Just like how Wuming had left behind legends in history and obtained a different identity as a servant, the Skywings also had stories in other worlds. Since they had stories, they naturally had the possibility of becoming heroic spirits. And Wuming had cheated by summoning the Skywings, so some of their skills or noble artifacts would naturally change because of what they had done in their own world. Azrael and Gopril were examples. Since that's the case, I'll just use the other Skywings as my trump cards. After that, Wuming put down the hand that was rubbing his eyebrows and opened his eyes. Immediately after, Wuming casually waved his hand, and golden ripples spread out around Wuming. A silver-white chain with a dark purple aura extended out of the golden ripples. Chapter 722. This was the chain that Wuming had used to subdue the berserk Gopril. Its name was Annihilation Lock. Wuming looked at the chain that resembled a heaven lock but was no longer a heaven lock. His heart was filled with all sorts of emotions. Wuming stroked the Annihilation Lock, and the Annihilation Lock seemed to have a mind of its own. Because of Wuming's touch, it flickered with a faint purple light. I didn't expect you to turn a fake into a real noble artifact. That's right. The Annihilation Lock in Wuming's hand had already become a noble artifact. It was not wrong to call it a noble artifact. Wuming had added his own authority to the chain. Although it was a weakened authority, the authority of a god was still not to be underestimated. When Wuming sent Gopril back, he discovered that the pseudo-heaven lock, which had absorbed one of Wuming's weakened authority, had been upgraded to the Annihilation Lock, which was a noble artifact. The Annihilation Lock was no longer a fake that would dissipate due to the evaporation of magic power. Instead, it had become a genuine noble artifact that would not wear out even after 1,000 years. The danger of this singularity is beyond my expectations, Wuming said calmly. To find help, Wuming had used his dependent incarnation. As there was no effective way to subdue Gopril, Wuming had deposited the authority of the Annihilation incarnation into the pseudo-heaven lock, so that the chain that he had casually created could bind the berserk Gopril. And just now, Wuming had also used his giant incarnation. As for when he used it, it was when Wu Ming had punched the first Hassan. At that time, Wu Ming defined the first Hassan as an enemy, and an enemy who had cut off one of his arms. Wu Ming did not dare to be careless. Therefore, Wu Ming directly used Giant Incarnation, gathered the power of Giant into his fist, and punched at first Hassan. However, Wu Ming was surprised that first Hassan's shield was able to block his attack. As expected of a crown servant. Even though the assassin class was generally considered the weakest among the 7 classes, the assassin class was not inferior to the saber class, which was generally considered to be the best class. The other saber servants were slightly inferior to the first Hassan. However, Wu Ming was not weak either. The Giant Incarnation's attack directly shattered the first Hassan's shield. That was the weapon of a crown servant, and it was not something that could be broken by just anyone. Just like the first Hassan's simple and unadorned greatsword that looked a little damaged and had become unsharp, and the cloak behind the first Hassan that looked like a ragged cloth. Both of them were not as weak as they looked on the surface. The greatsword that was constantly infused with the faith of the first Hassan had reached a level where it was undamaged, and it even had an instant death effect. The broken cloak was also quite powerful. Not only could it set off a sandstorm that was enough to cover the sun, but it also had a powerful defensive ability that was not weaker than the first Hassan's shield. Therefore, Wu Ming was able to break the first Hassan's shield. After all, in Wu Ming's opinion, the body of a servant was still too weak, unless he could also have a crown spiritual base. However, the crown spiritual base was created by suppression. Wu Ming did not need to submit to someone who was destined to be weaker than him, even if the other party was good to him. Anyway, when Wu Ming found his body, Wu Ming did not need to be a yes man anymore. If everything went well, maybe after solving this singularity, Wu Ming could find his body before Gadotsi and others went to Uruk. Then he could directly solve the singularity of the Uruk and kill Gidia. He had already seen Gidia's means, and he also forced the other party to detonate the black mud on the outer layer of each world to choose to severely injure Wu Ming. Gidia must have also been injured, otherwise he would not let Wu Ming mess around in this singularity. Gidia, who also saw Wu Ming's power, was really vigilant against Wu Ming. Since Wu Ming had already done so many things in this singularity, and no one stopped him, it was obvious that Gidia did not pay attention to this singularity. In Gidia's view, even with the help of Wu Ming, Chaldea could repair these burned residues, and it would have no impact on the result. To be more ruthless, even if the burn of humanity was rewritten and the burn of humanity was successfully restored by Chaldea, it would have no impact on Gidia. The reason was very clear to Wu Ming because Gidia's vision or ambition was no longer here. Gidia, who had come into contact with the black mud, had long changed his target to other worlds, a wider sea of stars. Although Wu Ming did not know what Gidia's original purpose was, Wu Ming knew that Gidia's purpose had changed from the original goal to going to other worlds. This was like a person's original plan was to take a rocket to the moon that was suitable for him, but before taking off he found a more habitable planet, Mars. Then using the existing fuel, changing the route and going to Mars wasn't impossible, right? As for the residues of the fuel, at this point that kind of thing was no longer necessary for that person to pay attention to. But for Gidia, Wu Ming, this bomb still needed to be paid attention to. And for Wu Ming, this hidden danger, Gidia, also needed to be paid attention to. Although Wu Ming was confident that the next time he fought with Gidia, Gidia might also have the same confidence. After all, both sides understood each other after fighting once, so Gidia might also have a way to deal with Wu Ming. But that was all in the future. From the current situation, Wu Ming and Gidia wouldn't meet for a while, and Wu Ming didn't have to worry about Gidia coming out to cause trouble. Closing his eyes, Wu Ming went deep into his inner world. A huge stone plate appeared in Wu Ming's heart. There were 12 small stone plates on the large stone plate. The small stone plates were placed in the 12 o'clock direction like a scale, and 3 small stone plates were in a completely dim, petrified grayish-white state. They were the giant incarnation at 2 o'clock, the annihilation incarnation at 5 o'clock, and the dependent incarnation at 8 o'clock. These 3 incarnations had been used by Wu Ming, and Wu Ming could only use the remaining 9 incarnations. But Wu Ming didn't regret it. After all, good steel should be used on the blade. After that, Wu Ming left the inner world and opened his eyes. The next thing he needed to think about was Artoria. Chapter 723. Whether it was from Ramses II or the first Hassan, Wu Ming learned one thing. That was, Artoria's change was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. There must be more to it than meets the eye. And according to the first Hassan's words of "I need thy rescue," Artoria's current state was not good. Although Wuming seemed to have a conflict with Artoria, Wuming could not sit still once something related to Artoria appeared. The feelings that he had gained from being with her for most of his life were not something that could be abandoned just because of a quarrel. If anyone thought that this feeling could be easily abandoned, then they had underestimated the bond between Wuming and Artoria. If I have a conflict with her and bully her until she cries, that's fine. But if you bully her until she cries, then I'm sorry, but you're done for. You'll die a horrible death, the kind that doesn't even leave behind a trace. Artoria was that she, and Wuming was that I. When it came to Artoria, Wuming would never give in, not even half a step. Wuming estimated that this matter might not have much to do with the Magus King, but the singularity was indeed caused by the Magus King in the beginning. And Wuming could not find trouble with the Magus King at the moment, so he could only take the right approach. Calculating the time, Tachika and the others should have arrived at the Holy City by now, Wuming thought. He decided to go to the Holy City first to meet up with Gadatsi and the others. But right now Gapril, who was in a coma, had yet to wake up. Wuming did not dare to let her move freely, and restricting her movements was not appropriate either. So Wuming decided to wait until Gapril woke up. Of course, Wuming could also choose to heal Gapril and take the initiative to wake her up. But because Wuming wanted to punish Gapril, he chose to let her recover on her own. However, things were different now. Wuming had to hurry. With that in mind, Wuming stood up from the sofa and walked out of the room. Aben was quite perceptive. He took the initiative to open a door on the wall not far away. If he was not mistaken, that door should be Jillian's room. Thinking so, Wuming walked to the front of Gypsy's door and politely knocked on the door. However, how could the unconscious Gapril possibly respond to Wuming? Wuming knocking on the door was just a mischievous act. After knocking on the door, Wuming pushed the door open and entered. His actions were rather smooth, and from this, it could be confirmed that Wuming had no intention of entering the room with Gapril's permission. Sometimes pleasure or bad taste was just that simple. Wuming subconsciously looked around when he entered Gapril's room. A room that looked no different from the other Skywings entered Wuming's eyes. The plain walls, the plain bed, and the plain table served as a foil to the angelic girl's beauty and purity. Wait a minute. Wuming looked at Gapril's beautiful face and suddenly realized something. If I use Vitality Incarnation, can I suppress Gapril's berserk? Yes, Wuming suddenly thought of his own authority. Since Wuming's origin dragon became stronger after the baptism of origin, Wuming hardly used Vitality Incarnation. The only time he used it recently was to restore the life of No Name. The reason why he did not use this incarnation was very simple, it was just too useless. Vitality Incarnation could provide Wuming with spring-like vitality. Not only could it recover injuries and mana, but it could also resist negative effects such as curses. However, after going through the origin baptism, Silent Dragon's recovery ability wasn't weak. Injuries and mana could be recovered quickly, and the origin dragon's body was also immune to negative effects. Therefore, Wuming basically did not use Vitality Incarnation. So, since Wuming could not use it, could this incarnation work on a servant who had fallen into Berserk? Chapter 724. Although Berserk could increase ability value, Berserk also had a negative effect on the servant. So, if he injected Vitality Incarnation into Jillian's body, would she be able to avoid the negative effects of Berserk? Of course, Wuming did not expect Jillian to enjoy the ability value increase from Berserk after she successfully maintained her rationality, as long as her rationality was no longer affected by Berserk. Wuming originally wanted to let the primitive Skywings help him, and he did not want to increase their ability value by much. After all, the price of increasing ability value was losing rationality, so it was better not to increase it. With that in mind, Wuming grabbed Jillian's soft body and closed his eyes. Wuming began to try to give the authority of Vitality Incarnation to Jillian. After all, Wuming had never tried to give authority to a servant. The situation when Wuming used Dependent Incarnation, Annihilation Incarnation, and Giant Incarnation was completely different from the current situation. When Wuming used the Dependent Incarnation, he used the power of the Dependent as a medium like a holy relic into the summoning circle. When Wuming used the Annihilation Incarnation, he added the power of Annihilation into the process of creating the pseudo-heavenly lock. When he used the Giant's power, he simply used it. Now, Wuming needed to instill the authority of Vitality Incarnation into Jillian's spirit base in an attempt to change the Berserk effect of Jillian's Berserker class. Wu Ming had experienced using his authority on a servant, but Wu Ming had never experienced using authority on a servant. Because he did not have any experience, Wu Ming could only fumble around on his own. Specks of phosphorescent magic power danced around Wu Ming's body, and the magic power seemed to have a life of its own as it surrounded Jillian. Then Wu Ming began to chant. The one with the supreme divine power of the guardian, the protection of the god, the abomination of the devil, nothing can get close to her, surging like a fountain of vitality. As she chanted, the surrounding phosphorescent light shone brightly. The originally star-like mana turned into a mass of mana, dancing around Jillian. That was Wu Ming's authority, the embodiment of Wu Ming's vitality. Grant the world equal protection. The moment the last sentence was chanted, the mana sphere representing Wu Ming's vitality incarnation instantly fused with Gopril's body. A faint radiance was emitted from Jillian's body, and Wu Ming, who was holding Jillian's hand, could clearly feel that Jillian's mana was rapidly recovering. This meant that, success. There was no surprise, no joy, as if it was a matter of course. Wu Ming said indifferently. No matter what, it was still Wu Ming's own authority. If he couldn't control it himself, then who could he count on? For Wu Ming it was unexpected but reasonable. Along with the rapid recovery of her mana, Jillian, who was lying on the bed, slowly opened her eyes. Jillian spoke subconsciously, somewhat puzzled. Although Jillian gave off a sleepy feeling, Wu Ming knew that this was the aftereffect of Jillian's madness. How do you feel, Jillian? Wu Ming asked with concern. Master. Jillian, who heard Wu Ming's words, was obviously shocked. After coming back to her senses, Jillian saw Wu Ming holding her hand and looking at her with a face full of concern. She responded shyly to Wu Ming. Master is really concerned about me. Could it be that Master wants to do something perverted to me? If it's Master, sure. Jillian's answer instantly made Wu Ming raise his brows. Then Wu Ming silently raised his fist. Bang! After a short while, Wu Ming sat on Jillian's bed with his legs crossed, while Jillian stood in front of Wu Ming with a smile on her face. It seemed that there was no problem at all. Of course, that was if one ignored the bump on Jillian's head. How do you feel, Jillian? Wu Ming crossed his arms and repeated his previous question. Jillian, who had learned her lesson, naturally didn't tease Wu Ming anymore. Instead, she began to answer seriously. Yes, although I don't know what happened, my body seems to have endless energy. Jillian wasn't an idiot. Instead, she was quite smart. Naturally, Jillian remembered what had happened before she lost consciousness. Combined with her own berserk EX, Jillian naturally deduced that she had lost her rationality and went berserk because of that skill. Although Wu Ming didn't say it explicitly, the reason why she could wake up without any discomfort was probably related to her master. You don't have the urge to kill like crazy anymore? Wu Ming asked. Jillian shook her head and said helplessly and playfully. I'm a Skywing after all. Of course, I still want to kill. Wu Ming glared at Jillian and she immediately became obedient. But the feeling of wanting to kill can be controlled, just like in my original world. Jillian touched the bump on her head with some lingering fear. Her master's beating really hurt. Afterward, Jillian propped up her other arm with one hand, and the arm that was propped up extended a finger to her chin as she spoke again, puzzled. Not only that, I realized that compared to before I'm calmer, as if the urge has been eliminated, right? Wu Ming answered for Jillian in advance. Yes, that's right. That's it. Not only that, even if I'm angry I can only feel it a little. My anger seems to have been soothed by something. Gilliar sighed. This feeling was a little uncomfortable for her. It was like having a hot-tempered friend, but one day he suddenly became not hot-tempered and he became very calm. Not to mention the people who knew him, even he himself was surprised and uncomfortable with his current personality. However, Jillian's answer made Wu Ming close his eyes and nod. It seems that the authority is in effect. Because the effect of vitality incarnation was still active, whenever Jillian had negative emotions such as rage and killing, vitality incarnation would purify them. But after all, it was a weakened version of authority incarnation, and it didn't affect Wu Ming himself, so it might not work completely on Jillian. However, there was one thing that was certain: Jillian would no longer be affected by berserk. Chapter 725. Wu Ming told Jillian what he had done to Jillian. Then Jillian knelt down on one knee in shock. Lord Wu Ming, please forgive me for being blunt, but your gift is too precious. After knowing that Wu Ming had bestowed her with God's authority by slaying a god, she immediately became very serious. Although Gapril usually looked very playful, that was just her appearance. Every Skywing was serious and bloodthirsty, and Gapril was no exception. Once something serious happened, Gapril would become serious just like now. Even Gapril's address for Wuming changed from Master to Lord Wuming because she became serious. Is that what you think, Gapril? Wuming smiled helplessly and shook his head. But I think it's a good deal. A dispensable authority incarnation in exchange for a rational helper. No matter how Wuming thought about it, he was the one who profited. Lord Wuming, I can feel the power of authority in my body. Gapril looked into Wuming's eyes. Even if I've been emitting magic power, the magic power in my body hasn't decreased in the slightest, and it's still full. That was the effect of the authority Wuming bestowed on Gapril. Not only that, but I also feel the surging vitality in my body all the time, as if it's about to break out of my body. That was naturally the effect of vitality incarnation. The endless vitality could quickly replenish and heal injuries. Gapril estimated that even if she was seriously injured, she would not need to go to the repair device to recover. In just a few minutes, the serious injury would disappear, and she would recover to her peak strength. Through these visible effects, Gapril also understood how powerful this power was. It was too wasteful to give such power to her. If Wuming kept it, it could be used as a trump card. Therefore, this subordinate believes that for such a precious authority, you should keep it instead of giving it to this subordinate. I don't agree with you, Gapril. Wuming gave Gapril a negative opinion. It's a real waste not to use the authority because it's precious and you're afraid of wasting it. Wuming's words made Gapril stunned, but it was not without reason. Even if something was precious, it had a use. If you chose not to use it because it was precious and kept it for safekeeping, then that item would definitely be shamed. Just like money, no matter how much money you earned, if you didn't use it, you would still be a pile of dirt after you died. To put it simply, Wuming was a person who believed in making the best use of everything. He would not use something because it was too precious. Of course, this was not to say that Wuming was a fool. Since Wuming chose to use it, there would naturally be benefits to be gained. Letting Gapril regain her consciousness was undoubtedly beneficial to Wuming's current situation. Compared to Wuming not knowing if he could use the vitality incarnation, it was better to give it to Gapril. Having decided to use the other Skywings as joker cards, Wuming did not choose to use the vitality incarnation on them and instead used it on Gapril alone. Apart from this, Wuming could not guarantee that the vitality incarnation on the Skywings would be able to suppress berserk transformation. Therefore, using it on the strongest Skywing lifeform, Gapril, was the best decision. After all, the saying quality not quantity made sense. So, Gapril, if you feel afraid and guilty about having the authority of a god, then do your best to fight for me. What could he do if he felt guilty? He just had to make it seem like he deserved it. The best way was to make military contributions. Wuming's words made Gapril's eyes light up. Gapril instantly perked up and replied to Wuming with a victorious smile. Yes. The Skywing alien Giliel is determined to sweep away all the enemies in your path for you, my lord. Victory for you. At this moment, Gapril seemed to have found her purpose in that war that had lasted for who knew how long. For my lord's victory, I won't hesitate to die. Get ready, Gapril. We'll go to the holy city in a moment, Wuming said and walked toward the door. He did not forget that this was Gapril's room. Yes. Hearing Gapril's response, Wuming pushed the door open and went out. After closing the door, Wuming let out a long sigh of relief. Gapril is really giving me a headache, Wuming said as he walked toward the surveillance room that Abant had opened for him. But it's better to have a headache than to have no one to deal with her, Wuming said and walked into the surveillance room. Wuming sat on the familiar sofa and looked at the virtual surveillance screen in front of him. Wuming shouted to Abant. Abant, can you turn on the surveillance around you? There were no words, only the changes on the virtual screen in front of Wuming. The virtual screen no longer showed the Skywings, but the barren land and withered branches that had lost all life, as well as the clear sky with a large halo. There was no doubt that Abant was like a moving fortress in the sky, turning on the surveillance of his surroundings. Very good. Then let's go, Abant. Wuming nodded, then raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Pa. In an instant, a huge black-purple ripple appeared in front of Abant Heim. It was Wuming's teleportation skill, and on the other side of the teleportation gate was the holy city that Wuming had been to before. The black-purple ripple kept wriggling as if it was the gate of hell. This was originally the special effect of the teleportation gate. It did not look like much when it was the height of a person, but after it was played out, it was a little nauseating. Anyway, Wuming felt that it was a little strange, so it was better to leave quickly. "Let's go, Abant." After Wuming said that, Abant moved. Although Wuming did not feel any signs of movement, through the surveillance that Abant gave to Wuming, he could see that Abant was gradually entering the teleportation gate that Wuming had opened. In just a moment, Abant was completely submerged in the black-purple ripple. As if he had received a notification, the black-purple ripple instantly closed. Abantheim's departure did not leave any trace. The barren land was still the same barren land, and the large halo in the sky was still the same blue sky. Only this singularity was still collapsing. Chapter 726. The pure white city walls stood on the plains, surrounding the last pure land on this land. The current holy city was called Camelot. It was a holy city with chalk walls. It was built on these ruins. A large group of refugees surrounded the gate of the holy city. They looked up at the holy city from time to time. But after a few glances they quickly lowered their heads, as if they would tarnish the holy city if they looked too much. The refugees knew that this place was originally a religious holy land, the holy city of Jerusalem. Later it was occupied by the Lionheart King Charlie I. However, Charlie I was not a wise king. To say that he was a tyrant was an understatement. He was simply a demon. But fortunately, the cruel and heartless Lionheart King was defeated by the new Lion King. Although the Lionheart King was defeated, almost all the people were displaced because of the war. In order to provide shelter for the people, after the Lion King defeated the Lionheart King, the new holy city was built at an extremely fast speed. This made the people who heard the news very excited. But the truth was beyond their expectations. The Lion King did not open the city to accept the refugees. Instead, he closed the city gate and did not allow the refugees to enter at will. Moreover, he also ordered that the holy city would hold a holy selection every once in a while. As long as they passed the holy selection, they could enter the holy city and start a new life. However, the refugees who had suffered a lot did not want to wait any longer. So, the first bird came out. Defeating the evil Lionheart King made the Lion King on the side of justice in the eyes of the people. The Lion King was benevolent. This was something that many people believed at that time and even now. However, there were always some people who were not honest. People were divided into good and evil. The good people waited for the holy selection to proceed, while the evil people raised the flag of rebellion. They formed a rebellion army and launched an attack on the holy city. However, how could these so-called rebels be a match for the Lion King who defeated the Lionheart King? In the eyes of outsiders, the rebel army was instantly defeated without any surprise. However, the Lion King forgave them and let them participate in the holy selection. What a benevolent king. These refugees who only knew how to express themselves thought so. However, the problem was that since it was a selection, there must be people who failed. However, this was something that no one noticed. Where did all the people who failed the selection go? The refugees only thought that those people had entered the holy city to live and didn't think too much about it. Even the rebel army that wanted to rebel against the Lion King had the qualifications to enter the holy city. How easy was it for this king to be selected? No, it should be said that this Lion King was very benevolent. In this way, the people who had been displaced by the war would naturally rush here spontaneously after hearing the news. More and more refugees rushed over and entered the holy city. The number of refugees in the wilderness dwindled. The newly arrived refugees did not consider whether the sacred city could accommodate such a large number of refugees. Or rather, they were subconsciously deceiving themselves. Everything was for the sake of survival. Although there were many dangers in the wilderness of this era due to the changes in the singularity, there were still many refugees who insisted on coming. As long as there was a glimmer of hope to survive in a safe place, people who yearned for a safe environment would not give up. At this moment, the refugees at the entrance of the holy city were the ones who had just arrived. According to the solemn night patrolling around the holy city, the frequency of saint selection had increased. Now there would be a saint selection every few days. This undoubtedly made the refugees very excited. Because they would be safe soon. There would be no more danger and no more harm. According to the solemn night, a group of refugees had been bewitched by the mountain people in the northern mountains and the emissaries of the new powers in the west. They had escaped the holy city's selection. How foolish. Every refugee who gathered at the entrance of the holy city for the saint selection thought so. Giving up a good life in the holy city and running to live with the mountain people, were they blinded by faith? However, it seemed that one of the leaders of the mountain people had been killed by the holy city's gatekeepers and the guerrilla knights. It could be considered a lesson for those people. However, this had nothing to do with them. Soon they would be able to enter the holy city and live a happy life. As if responding to the inner thoughts of the refugees, the gates of the holy city opened. Generally speaking, the patrolling knights around the holy city would not enter or leave the holy city. They had their own strongholds around the holy city. In other words, the opening of the holy city's gates meant that the saint's selection was about to take place. Immediately after, the sound of steel armor stepping on the ground came from the holy city's gates. Then, the sound of uniform footsteps, exuding a surging aura, entered the ears of the refugees. All the refugees stood up excitedly and looked at the holy city's gatekeeper, Sir Gawain, who was leading the solemn knights to conduct the saint's selection. Without the slightest change, the Knights of Solemnity surrounded the refugees as if they were preparing for a ceremony. Gawain walked into the encirclement of the solemn knights. He was about to begin the saint's selection as usual. At this moment, there was a sudden commotion among the refugees. Gawain frowned. Could it be that someone would appear this time to stop the saint's selection? Could it be the Master of Chaldea, who represents the new power, or is it Hassan again? Gawain shook his head. After the saint's selection refugees' escape a few days ago, Gawain had brought enough manpower this time. If he still wanted to save the refugees with just a few servants, it would not be so easy. However, I still have to be wary of that winged guy, Gawain muttered to himself. As the representative of the new power, Chaldea's master was indeed not powerful enough. However, Berserker, who had wings like an angel, made Gawain take it a little seriously. As expected of the holy spear that could withstand the holy spear that the king released when he woke up. The people of that new power are indeed very strong. If it were not for the problem of leaving, Gawain would have been more than happy to go all out and have a good fight with that angel. Gawain shook his head. The most important thing now was to proceed with the saint's selection smoothly. Otherwise he would not be able to explain himself to Gawain. Silence! Gawain shouted and the restless crowd calmed down. However, they all looked at the sky behind them. Gawain was taken aback, then realized something. The holy city was behind him. Could it be that the enemy had launched an air attack? Gawain turned his head and looked at the sky. What he saw made his pupils shrink. For some reason, a huge purplish-black ripple suddenly appeared high in the sky. However, that was not the main point. The main point was the thing that appeared from the purplish-black ripple. It was a huge floating tree. Gawain didn't seem to have any intention of caring about these refugees. Instead, he immediately entered the holy city. The solemn knights ignored the refugees. Thus the refugees knew their fate. He was just a dispensable weakling. However, they had no choice. Before the Lion King was a kind person, he was still a king. It was impossible for them to vent their anger on the sacred city. Therefore, the refugees could only vent their frustrations on the floating trees that appeared in the sky. However, the solemn atmosphere at the gate of the holy city made it so that they did not dare to shout and curse. They could only express their dissatisfaction with the floating trees in their hearts. Inside the floating trees, or rather inside a bont, Wuming sat in the monitoring room, silently watching the image of the holy city below. I didn't expect Abant's image to be so clear. Although he did not know how far Abant was from the ground, Wuming knew that it was definitely not close. However, the image that Abant provided was at its largest, so detailed that it could reach the hair of the refugees that had fallen to the ground. Thus, using magic to reach the level of science did not make sense. Master, I'm ready." At this moment, Giliel's voice came from outside the room. Giliel very consciously did not open the door and directly floated in through the wall. The ability of the Skywings to pass through walls made Wuming feel rather helpless. She clearly had the ability of an assassin, so why did she become a berserker? "Then Master, what do you need me to do? Do you want me to cast Sky Strike?" Giliel asked as she floated around Wuming. "There's no need for that. Besides, even if it's you, I'm afraid you won't be able to cause any damage to the holy city." Wuming did not ridicule Giliel for wanting to cast Sky Strike right from the start. He shook his head rather seriously. "See here?" Wuming then zoomed in on the map on the magic screen, shifted his position, and used his finger to point at the interior of the holy city. As Abant was high above the holy city, logically speaking, from the image that Abant provided, he should be able to see the entire interior of the holy city. "But, I can't see the interior?" Giliel was slightly surprised. Yes, from the image directly above, one could not see, or rather, could not clearly see the interior of the holy city. The holy city below was clearly just a city, but in the image the interior of the holy city was filled with a mosaic-like light film. The light blocked the view of the interior, and from the ground, due to the height of the holy city's walls, it was still impossible to see the interior. This should be the defense formed by Artoria's holy spear. Not only can it defend against aerial attacks, it can also block detection, Wu Ming explained to Giliel. Artoria? Master sounds so familiar. Could it be that he's someone Mostet knows? Giliel teased Wu Ming in an ambiguous tone, as if she could tell that Wu Ming had special feelings for that Artoria. Bah. Ouch. Giliel hugged her head and floated around in the control room trying to relieve the pain. Wu Ming silently put down his fist, and without even looking at Giliel, he got down to business. Abant, can you detect Azrael's magic power? Wu Ming, who could not see the interior of the holy city, could not determine whether Azrael and Gadotsi had entered the holy city, so Wu Ming wanted Abant to detect Azrael's magic power. As someone who was familiar with Azrael, Abant must have a way. Abant did not respond, but a progress bar appeared on the big screen. The progress bar ended, and the map of the holy city, including the surroundings of the holy city, reappeared before Wu Ming. On this map, the location of the city gate and the north were marked with blue marks. It was Azrael's magic power that Abanti had detected, and Abanti had presented it to nothingness as a blue mark. It seemed that Azrael had gone to the north. However, this was not the only thing Wu Ming was concerned about. This is the trace of a battle. Chapter 728. Wasn't it obvious? Wu Ming ordered Azrael to secretly follow Gadotsi and the others. She would not appear unless it was absolutely necessary. However, Abant detected a lot of Azrael's magic power. Wasn't it obvious that Azrael had fought? And Wu Ming felt that the magic power left behind was more like a mark left by Azrael than a trace of a battle. It was normal for a servant to leave behind magic power from a battle. Therefore, Gawain did not deliberately remove the residual magic power. And Gawain's inaction left Azrael's mark behind. The magic power left by Azrael extended all the way to the north. In other words, Gadotsi and the others retreated to the north. Could it be that Tachika and the others just happened to encounter the Saint-Elect? Wu Ming guessed. As the emissary who wanted to see the Lion King, Gadotsi and the others would not have a conflict for no reason. And the only thing that could make Gadotsi and the others have a conflict with the holy city was the Saint-Elect. After all, Artoria was not an unreasonable person. Even if she was deified by the Holy Lance and became the goddess Lungaminiad, if Gadotsi and the others asked for an audience, Artoria would most likely agree. Even if it was because of Chaldea's action of saving the 5 singularities, when Gadotsi and the others asked for an audience, Artoria would agree to see them. Wu Ming estimated that when Gadotsi and the others came here, the Saint-Elect happened to be at the gate of the holy city. Gadotsi and the others could not bear to see the refugees who were not selected to be slaughtered, so they intervened to stop the Saint-Elect from going on. However, it was not correct to say that they stopped it. It should be said that they obstructed it. Because Gadotsi and the others did not have the strength to fight against Gawain. Not to mention Da Vinci in the face of the Knights of the Round Table, the immature Matthew could only protect his master, and Azrael was also ordered by Wu Ming to not show up easily. And their opponent, Gawain, the gatekeeper of the holy city, Wu Ming guessed that he must have received the blessing from the Lion King, just like Tristan. However, even if Gawain did not receive the blessing, Gadotsi and the others could not deal with him. And with Wu Ming's understanding of Gadotsi, after seeing the refugees being slaughtered, she would definitely intervene. She knew that it was impossible, but as long as it was the right thing to do, she would still do it. This was the spirit of the last master of Chaldea, Fujimaru Rika. It was this precious spirit that made all the servants who met Gadotsi were willing to work for her. In fact, to put it simply, Gadotsi had the charisma to attract servants. In this singularity, Wu Ming did not encounter any servants who were alone. So, Wu Ming did not know if there would be anyone other than Azrael to help Gadotsi. Wu Ming would think of the worst-case scenario. Gadotsi was no match for Gawain, and under Azrael's cover, she fled with some of the refugees. As for why they didn't escape with all the refugees, Wu Ming had underestimated Gadotsi. They really didn't have the ability to do so. At most, they could only bring a portion of the refugees away. Even with Azrael, it wouldn't be enough. After all, their number was too small, and it was simply impossible to cover all the refugees. Putting this aside for the time being, Wu Ming had discovered that something was wrong. According to Azrael's remaining battle magic, the direction of escape was the north. Logically speaking, if Gadotsi wanted to escape, she would not escape to the north. After all, Wuming was her strongest backing, so she should escape to the west where Wuming was. And being forced to retreat to the north did not make sense. With Azrael's cover, Gadatsi was fully capable of moving toward Wuming. There was no need for her to go to the unfamiliar north. But Gadatsi still chose to lead the refugees to the north under all kinds of unfavorable circumstances. So, there was only one possibility. Someone suggested that they go to the north. And who was this person? Wuming guessed that it was most likely Hassan. It was very likely that Gadatsi and the others came to the holy city to meet the Lion King, but they saw the solemn knight slaughtering the unselected refugees at the end of the holy selection. This made Gadatsi and the others stop them. And it just so happened that Hassan was around. However, Hassan was an assassin and did not have much combat strength. Therefore, under Azrael's cover, Hassan proposed to transfer these refugees to the mountains in the north. That was Hassan's territory, and the villages there were extremely difficult to find, so it was suitable for these refugees. As for why Hassan came to the holy city, it was easy to guess. Hassan had reasons such as wanted to sneak into the holy city to assassinate the Lion King through the holy selection, learned from the refugees rescued by Wuming that the holy selection slaughtered the unselected refugees in order to save them, and happened to meet him while collecting information. In short, there were many ways to explain why Hassan appeared here. However, Wuming did not know which Hassan met with Gadatsi and the others. However, Wuming felt that there was a high possibility that it was the smoke-drunk Hassan whom he saved. What? It was because she was the one who brought back the refugees who knew the truth about the holy selection. Wuming could be sure that there was more than one Hassan on his back, but Wuming was not sure if these Hassans could communicate with each other. Even Wuming knew that a cunning rabbit has 3 burrows. In order to avoid the pursuit of the holy city, those Hassans would not have arranged their existences together. If they could not communicate normally, then the Hassan who came here to help Gadatsi and the others was most likely the smoke-drunk Hassan. However, there were exceptions to everything. These were just Wuming's guesses. However, one thing was clear. Gadatsi and the others were not in the holy city. Instead, they went to the mountains in the north with Azrael. In this way, there was no need for Wuming to continue staying here. With this thought in mind, Wuming nodded to himself and then spoke to Abent. Abent, follow the magic power left behind by Azrael and head north. Wuming was not prepared to meet with Artoria and the Knights of the Round Table now. The most important thing now was to find Gadatsi and hand over the Holy Grail to Chaldea. However, Abent did not know what Wuming was thinking, and neither did Gabriel. Gabriel only knew that she, Wuming, and Abent had just arrived here and were about to leave. Hey, Master, are you leaving now? Don't you want to stay a little longer? Gabriel said coquettishly. No, let's find Azrael and the others first. Hey, why are you doing this? Gabriel looked unhappy. Then Wuming once again raised his fist. This caused Gabriel's unhappy face to instantly turn into a happy one. Compared to Gabriel's displeasure, Abent was much more obedient. If his master said he was leaving, then he would leave. However, Wuming came so ostentatiously and wanted to leave so simply. It would not be so easy. That was because Gawain had already reported to a groupin, and a groupin had already woken up the Lion King who often slept. Chapter 729. On the tallest spire in the center of the holy city, the Lion King stood alone on an open platform with the holy spear in her hand. Her eyes glowing with golden divinity, Artoria looked at the floating tree in the sky that had begun to move toward the north. Villo? Artoria muttered Wuming's name as she looked at the floating tree. In the holy city, Gawain returned to the gate of the holy city. He had already reported to Egwuin, and Egwuin said that he had already awakened the king when the enemy appeared. The king also said that he would attack the third party that provoked the holy city. After that, Gawain returned to the gate of the holy city after Egwuin gave him a few more instructions. Gawain was determined to be the king's tool, so without Artoria's instructions, Gawain would not do anything else. What he needed to do next was to continue the holy purification and clean up the humans who were not qualified. Continue the holy purification, Knights of Solemnity in position. Following Gawain's order, the Knights of Solemnity surrounded the refugees again. The refugees' faces turned from joy to horror as they began the massacre. Ignoring the refugees' screams, Gawain turned around. None of them are qualified. Recalling what Egwuin told him, Gawain shook his head. He said that it was the king who told him to immediately carry out the holy purification. Although he did not know why it was so urgent, as a tool, Gawain chose to follow the order. Seeing that most of the refugees had been killed, Gawain shook his head and entered the holy city. Looks like there aren't many people who are qualified to enter the holy city. The Knights of Solemnity would take care of the remaining traces. In the sky, in Abante's monitoring room, Wu Ming naturally saw the scene of the refugees being slaughtered, but there was nothing he could do, because Wu Ming found that Artoria had locked onto him. Although Abante could not detect the holy city, Wu Ming, who had a special connection with Artoria, could feel that he had been locked onto by the holy spear. Artoria did not allow Wu Ming to interfere with the holy purification because she wanted to prove her determination to Wu Ming. And Wu Ming was not a saint, so he would not risk being attacked by the holy spear to save the refugees. Previously, he had only done what he could to save those refugees at the gates of the holy city. The reason why he saved the refugees from Tristan's hands was also because it was within his capabilities. Of course, there was also the matter of face. Those refugees were saved by him, so if they were killed in front of Silent Wonder, then Silent Wonder would lose face. This time, however, it was different. Abante was high up in the sky, far from the ground. Furthermore, Lungo Minyad had locked onto him. This was a ceremony to prove Artoria's decision to Wu Ming. If Wu Ming messed up, Artoria wouldn't be polite. More importantly, if Wu Ming made a move, he might have a falling out with Artoria. If Silent Wonder had been summoned normally as Varen, then as a knight, he would have been influenced by the spirit base to prevent the refugees from being massacred, but it was a pity. Wu Ming added his main body's authority to this spirit base, summoning the Skywing species and Abante. This spirit base was no longer a pure British silver dragon, Varosiris Ed, but the dominant one was the origin dragon, Wu Ming. Even though the two of them were the same person. Abante, speed up and continue to move north, Wu Ming urged Abante. Wu Ming, who had never been to the north, could not use the portal, so he could only use Abante as a vehicle to move. Abant sped up and headed north without stopping. Wu Ming opened the portal and walked in. After walking out of the portal, Wu Ming arrived outside of Abante. Wu Ming silently looked at the tallest tower in the center of the holy city below. It was strange, as if Artoria had removed the shield. Wu Ming saw Artoria standing at the top of the tallest tower in the holy city. Artoria also raised her head and looked at Wu Ming. Neither of them spoke. Wu Ming read some of Artoria's thoughts from her eyes. Artoria's determination showed that she would save people in her own way. Even Wu Ming could not change her mind. However, Wu Ming just smiled. He did not think that the first Hassan was wrong. He would definitely come back to save Artoria, who was deeply deified. He waved his hand again and the black and purple ripples swallowed Wu Ming. Abante, who was moving north, had also moved a large distance. He was almost out of the sky around the holy city. The two met again and it ended abruptly. Lord Vero? My king. Guinevere was hiding behind one of the buildings on the platform where Artoria was. He was muttering Wu Ming and Artoria's names. Let's go back, Guinevere. Artoria's sudden voice startled Guinevere. Yes, yes. On the other side, Aguawan, who was in the tower of the holy city, saw the floating tree safely leave. He could not help but frown. His king promised him to destroy the enemy, and he did not keep his promise. However, even if his king did not keep his promise, he would not be dissatisfied. It was not something he should think about. Shaking his head silently, Aguawan went to welcome Artoria's return. What he needed to do was to eliminate all the enemies, and then sacrifice them all for the sake of his king's great cause. That was all. On Abante's side, Wu Ming was sitting on the sofa, thinking about the next step of his plan. Artoria had really changed. She was not the kind of person who would do things her own way. As long as someone advised her to do something, she would think about it and ask for more. However, this meeting between Wu Ming and Artoria made Wu Ming see that Artoria, as King Wu Ming, was not determined because she had become the goddess Lungaminiad. In short, she was on the wrong path. For people who were on the wrong path, what they needed was to be pulled up. According to First Hassan, saving the Lion King would not only require Wu Ming's power, but also the power of the silver arm. If I'm not wrong, Bedivere must be in this singularity. However, it was not easy to find someone who could move in a sea of people. It was wiser to meet up with Gadotsi and the others. At this time, Abante gave Wu Ming a hint. On the magic screen provided by Abante, Wu Ming saw a team of knights with the symbol of the holy city's Lion King. The leader was one of the knights of the Round Table that Wu Ming was familiar with, Lancelot. Chapter 730. That's right, the leading knight was a knight in purple armor, and this knight was Lancelot. What's wrong? Master, do you know that knight? Gilliel heard Wu Ming's muttering and moved her head closer. Yes, I do know him. Wu Ming nodded, but his expression was a little awkward. Lancelot was indeed a very upright person. He was recognized as the #1 knight under Artoria other than Wu Ming. As for why Wu Ming had to be excluded, it was because the other knights thought that Wu Ming was simply a monster, and could not be included in the ranks of comparison. But that was not the main point. The main point was that Lancelot actually liked Guinevere. Guinevere liked Wu Ming, and compared to Guinevere, Wu Ming liked Artoria more. Artoria took the initiative to distance herself from Wu Ming because of the king for the people reason. This relationship was like a third-rate idol drama, which made Wu Ming feel quite helpless. Of course, Lancelot liked Guinevere when the timeline was correct. King Arthur's story had silence involvement, and it was very likely that a lot of changes had taken place. The story of The Long March to Seize the Bull, and the Epic of Gilgamesh, also had a butterfly effect because of Wu Ming's intrusion. It was already different from the original, that Wu Ming knew. But one thing was certain. Wu Ming had read the story of King Arthur in the world of the War of the 14 Knights, and also read the story of the deceased King Arthur in the world of Mayu and Ilia. In the story, Lancelot did not exactly show his love for Guinevere. What did this mean? This meant that every world was affected by Wu Ming. It turned out that although it was a parallel world because of Wu Ming's special identity, as long as Wu Ming made an impact on history in a parallel world, there would be stories of Wu Ming in every parallel world because of Wu Ming's special identity. But this did not mean that countless Wu Ming had experienced an adventure in every parallel world. In Wu Ming's view, it was more like a copy and paste between worlds. Take for example. The Gilgamesh that Wu Ming met was obviously the female version, but the male version was also quite familiar with Wu Ming, and Wu Ming was also very familiar with the male version of Gilgamesh as if they had lived and experienced together. Therefore, Wu Ming wasn't unfamiliar with the male version of Gilgamesh, and Wu Ming wasn't unfamiliar to the male version of Gilgamesh either. It was as though Wu Ming was the male version of Gilgamesh's Hyunryong. But Wu Ming didn't experience it with the male version of Gilgamesh. In other words, all the Wu Ming in the parallel worlds had become one person just like Zelik. And the story that Wu Ming participated in was no longer the story that Wu Ming knew from the beginning of the ordinary world. At the end of King Arthur's story, Guinevere was burned at the stake after Morgan Le Fay's scheme failed and revealed the fact that she loved Wu Ming. In the end, Lancelot robbed the execution ground in the name of loving Guinevere. But Guinevere had also told Wu Ming with certainty that nothing happened between her and Lancelot. Wu Ming could see that Guinevere didn't lie to him. As a reader who had read the King Arthur's legend without Vilo the Ransword, Wu Ming knew that the reason why Lancelot fell in love with Guinevere was because during the process of being Guinevere's knight, both of them gradually developed a spiritual love because of King Arthur's sigh. And Guinevere's knight became Wu Ming, so Lancelot shouldn't have fallen in love with Guinevere anymore. Therefore Wu Ming didn't need to feel awkward. After all, nothing happened between him and Guinevere. Master, I feel that you and this guy named Lancelot don't have a good relationship." Jillian looked back and forth between Wu Ming and Lancelot on the big screen as if she really saw some clues. Then Jillian was warned by Wu Ming's iron fist. "No matter what, let's meet Lancelot first." Seeing that Lancelot's direction wasn't the holy city, Wu Ming was curious. There were no houses to live in there, only a large mound. It was impossible for the people of the mountain to live there. So, what did Lancelot go to do? Wu Ming let Abent continue to head north. Although he was a little worried about Jillian staying in Abent's body alone, Jillian, who had been given the Vitality incarnation, wouldn't make Wu Ming worry. Then Wu Ming opened the portal connecting to the ground and walked in. "Hee Abent, let me see why Master went to find Lancelot." As soon as Wu Ming left, Jillian stopped covering her head and flew to the big screen excitedly. However, the big screen that was playing Lancelot suddenly turned black. "Hey. Why is it like this, Abent?" Jillian shouted regretfully. Then a line of words appeared on the big screen. "Hey, what's this?" Jillian curiously went up. "If I knew you would peep at me, I would have let Abent cut off the image when you came over. Just wait for another bump on your head." Sigh. Jillian was stunned. Then Jillian's sorrowful voice was heard. Hey. On the ground, in the shadow of a mound, a dark purple ripple opened and Wu Ming walked out. Was that Jillian's scream just now? Wu Ming smiled as he looked at the teleportation gate that was almost closed. She's really dishonest. Shaking his head, Wu Ming stopped thinking about Jillian. The mound that Wu Ming chose was a mound that Abent had detected that Lancelot's troops had to pass through. Presumably, Lancelot would arrive soon. Wu Ming looked at his clothes. "Before that, I should change into a knight's armor." As Wu Ming spoke, magic power surged and covered Wu Ming's entire body, including his head. A few seconds later, a handsome silver-white knight wearing armor and a cloak appeared. Now all I need to do is wait. After saying that, Wu Ming casually sat cross-legged and waited quietly. After a few minutes, Lancelot's troops, which were not moving very quickly, arrived. As Wu Ming was sitting in the shadow of the mound, ordinary knights would not be able to see him clearly from afar. However, with Lancelot's eyesight, he could naturally see him clearly. Everyone stop advancing and rest. Lancelot's pupils suddenly shrank, and he immediately issued an order to the troops behind him. Then he rode his horse towards Wu Ming's location. Chapter 731. The horse's speed was not fast, so Lancelot gave up halfway through the ride. Lancelot agilely jumped down from the horse and ran towards Wu Ming's direction. The black horse that was abandoned by Lancelot stopped and stayed where it was. Lancelot came to a position a few meters in front of Wu Ming. Lancelot, who was dizzy with joy, calmed down. "You." Lancelot didn't know what to say for a moment. It was as if his voice recorder was stuck. "What, don't you recognize me, Lancelot?" Wu Ming, who was sitting cross-legged, looked at Lancelot and took off his helmet. The helmet turned into magic power and disappeared with the wind like sand. Then Wu Ming's face, which was rather familiar to Lancelot, appeared. "Servillo, it's really you?" Lancelot instantly became agitated, but immediately after, Lancelot put on a sorrowful look. "If you came a little earlier, how good would that be?" Lancelot's tone was full of helplessness. "Are you referring to the matters regarding our king?" Although the relationship between Wu Ming and Artoria was known by Guinevere, and the other Knights of the Round Table also saw some clues, but in front of the Knights of the Round Table, Wu Ming still called Artoria, "our king." "Yes, Servillo, if you came a little earlier, maybe you could save our king." Lancelot nodded. Regarding this point, Silent Wonder admitted that he and Lancelot had the same thoughts. If he came here a little earlier, Artoria wouldn't have become like this, assimilated by the goddess. But it's not too late now. After the first Hassan reminded Wu Ming also understood that he could still save Artoria with his own strength and the silver arm. "By the way, Lancelot, you look a little different from Gao Wenqing and the others." Wu Ming looked at Lancelot meaningfully. Of course, Wu Ming was referring to Lancelot's attitude towards Artoria. The other knights were all loyal to Artoria. No matter what happened to Artoria, they would not feel sad about it. But Lancelot was very sad because of the change of the king, and this sadness burst out when he saw Wu Ming. "You're right, Servillo, I feel sad about it." Lancelot nodded. "Our king's current approach is not right. I wanted to stand on the opposite side of our king and fight our king with Guy." Lancelot said as if he was reminiscing. "However, only you, Lord Varon, can save our king. This is what Kai, Lamarck, Gaholis, and the others who stand against our king all agree on." Lancelot closed his eyes as he spoke. Hearing Lancelot's words, Wu Ming recalled the faces of Guy and the others. Just like how Wu Ming was familiar with them, they were also familiar with Wu Ming. They believed that the Lion King could be saved by Wu Ming. "I'm a sinner. I betrayed our king and I don't want to betray him again. So, like Gawain, I chose to stand on the side of our king and become a knight who will listen to our king." But Lancelot opened his eyes, which were filled with sadness and pain. "I don't want to see our king go down the wrong path. I don't want to see our queen cry. I don't want to see Camelot die." "Don't want to see our queen cry?" Hearing this, Wu Ming was a bit surprised. It seemed that Lancelot still had some yearning for Guinevere. "Guy and the others understood the pain in my heart. They understood me and entrusted the important task of finding you to me. After that, I volunteered to become a ranger knight, hoping to find you in advance." Lancelot did not believe that Wu Ming, as a knight of the Round Table, would not be summoned. Lancelot believed that, just like Galahad and Bedivere, Wu Ming must have been summoned to another place in this area because of some unforeseen circumstances. Heaven did not disappoint the faithful. Lancelot finally found Wu Ming today. "I finally found you, Servillo." Lancelot looked at Wu Ming with hope and excitement. However, Wu Ming did not care much about Lancelot's excitement. "I say, Lancelot, it must not feel good to kill a friend." Wu Ming turned his head to the distance and looked at the scenery in the distance. Lancelot was silent. How could it feel good? Whether it was Tristan, Gawain, Mordred, or Lancelot, although they were all on the king's side, the matter of killing a comrade was still a knot in their hearts. Even the most cold-hearted and seemingly most loyal to the king, a gull who was not important to the king, had a slight fluctuation in his heart. After all, they were comrades who had fought together for more than a decade. Even if he knew that they had all become heroic spirits and descended in the form of servants, how could he just kill them? The pain and sin of killing a comrade with his own hands would not disappear. Presumably, Guy and the others also thought the same. Not only did they have to brandish their swords at their own compatriots, but they also had to attack the king they were loyal to. How much condemnation did they have to make such a decision? Seeing that Lancelot did not say anything, Wu Ming spoke. I have been to the holy city and met the king and queen. Gawain also told me about you. Lancelot was stunned, then his eyes became gloomy. With Gawain's personality, he must have told Wu Ming everything. The villain must be very disappointed in us. Not only did we not stop the king, but we also killed our own. The thing that left the deepest impression on me was that Gawain told me about Gareth. Lancelot's expression became even gloomier. Whether it was the accidental killing of Gareth in his previous life or the guilt of not being able to kill Gareth in this life, Lancelot's heart was painful. That child is still as innocent as ever, just like Galahad. Wu Ming said with nostalgia. Wu Ming did not have the slightest sadness or anger, as if he was talking about an ordinary matter. Don't stand, sit down and talk. Wu Ming said to Lancelot with a smile. Lancelot was puzzled by Wu Ming's emotions. Why was he always so calm? But in the end, Lancelot sat down beside Wu Ming. Every knight of the Round Table is a good person. Guy and the others chose to stand against Artoria, and you chose to be completely loyal to Artoria. Wu Ming did not add the honorific Qin, nor did he address Artoria as queen. The tone of his communication with Lancelot also changed from colleague to friend. Whether it is you or them, you all acted for your own beliefs. I don't think there is anything to be sad about. Chapter 732. Lancelot listened quietly and did not interrupt. In order to prevent Artoria from going astray, they stood against her. In order to make up for the mistakes of your past life, you stood on Artoria's side. Even if you betrayed the king you served, even if you killed your own people, it was a choice you made based on your own beliefs, and you worked hard to live for it. Wu Ming paused for a moment, then looked at Lancelot. This result may be sad in the eyes of others, but in my opinion, as a knight of the Round Table, this is not something to be sad about. Lord Villo? Lancelot looked at Wu Ming blankly. Take Gareth for example. She believed that the king was right and she thought the same when she left. However, her pure spirit, which was not weaker than Galahad's, could not bear the inner condemnation of killing her own people, so she chose a suitable time to voluntarily leave. In my opinion, Gareth did a good job. Take you for example. In order to find me, you endured the pain of killing your own people. Take Artoria for example. She proved her will to me and I witnessed Artoria's proof. For this, a group of refugees died in front of me. This sentence shocked Lancelot. As someone who knew Wu Ming well, he knew that Wu Ming would not be stingy to help those who could be saved. Then Wu Ming's eyes became firm. However, if I had to do it again, I would still choose to stand by and do nothing. There was no such thing as a free lunch in the world, and there was no such thing as a free lunch. There was no such thing as a free lunch. In order to stop Artoria, Guy and the others were filled with condemnation. In order to protect Artoria, Lancelot and the others were stained with the blood of their own people. In order to protect humans, Artoria chose to turn them into specimens and bear the pain of others' incomprehension. In order to be loyal to Artoria, Gareth chose to be stained with the blood of his own people and had a nervous breakdown. In order to bear witness to Artoria's decision, Wu Ming did not save them, which went against his usual style. The price was light and the result was the same. There is no need to be sad about the past. Even if this sadness was caused by us, no matter what, this is the choice of the Knights of the Round Table. All we need to do is to look forward. Wu Ming wouldn't be immersed in the past. This was his way of survival as the origin dragon. This was also why Wu Ming's heart hadn't aged and was forever filled with the vigor of a youth. Because his heart was looking forward. Lancelot fell into silence. Wu Ming was right. It was because of his hesitation, because he was immersed in the guilt of betraying his king in the past, that he decided to be completely loyal to Artoria in this life. It was because Gawain felt guilty that his dissatisfaction with Lancelot had led to the Battle of Camlan, which ultimately led to the fall of Arthur's dynasty. That was why Gawain chose to be completely loyal to Artoria and become a tool without thinking. Tristan had hurt Artoria because of his words when she was alive. In order to make up for it, he also decided to be completely loyal to Artoria. It was the same for everyone. Because they wanted to make up for something, they chose to stand in their original position and wanted to do better. If we all let go of the past, will we be able to pull our king back from the wrong path? Lancelot said thoughtfully. However, they had already come this far. Just like Wu Ming said, they shouldn't be immersed in the past. They had to look forward. In short, I have found a way to save Artoria. Don't worry, leave it to me, Lancelot. Wu Ming said with a smile and extended his hand to Lancelot. Lancelot was stunned, then shook Wu Ming's hand. Yes, I'm counting on you, Lord Vero. This was a promise between friends. Lancelot chose to believe in Wu Ming. Then Lord Villo, what do you want to do next? Do you need to go to my camp to prepare? Lancelot stood up and asked respectfully. Now that the conversation between friends had ended, Lancelot also added a respectful title to Wu Ming. You have a camp outside the Holy City? Wu Ming was stunned. Was Lancelot not going to return to the Holy City to stay? Because I was anxious to find you, I have applied to stay outside for a long time. My king also agreed to my application, so I have my own camp, Lancelot explained. Since you have a camp, then let's go take a look. So Wu Ming joined Lancelot's team and set off together. In Abanti's body, Giliel had stopped Abanti's actions. Abanti had brought her to the sky above the northern mountains. Next, she needed Wu Ming's instructions. So slow, master. Giliel said in boredom as she rolled around in the air. However, at this moment, Wu Ming was already on the way to Lancelot's camp. Wu Ming rode a magically created horse and walked side by side with Lancelot at the front of the team. By the way, Mordred is also a guerrilla knight, right? Does she also have her own camp outside the Holy City? Wu Ming asked curiously. No. Mordred's words are a little special. Lancelot's expression became subtle when talking about Mordred. My king did not prepare a residence for Mordred in the Holy City, but Mordred should not have a residence outside. Due to Mordred's personality, she did not have a fixed residence. Moreover, she did not bring many knights with her. It could be said that compared to Lancelot, Mordred was a true guerrilla knight. As expected of her. Wu Ming's mouth twitched slightly. By the way, does Lord Villo know about Chaldea? Lancelot suddenly asked. Oh, are you talking about the last master? Wu Ming had a smile on his face. As expected, you know about the existence of Chaldea. Lancelot nodded and began his explanation. Yesterday, the master of Chaldea and the mountain folk in the north fled to the northern mountains with a group of St. Bard refugees. I happened to be nearby and was ordered to pursue them by agronomy. Guerrilla Knights seemed to be a noble title, but in fact they were scouts and vanguards. To put it bluntly, if something happened, they would be the first to go up to the Holy City. The reason why Tristan was often sent out by agronomy was because of the instability of the Guerrilla Knights. After all, if you were here today, you might be there tomorrow. You really pursued them? Wu Ming looked at Lancelot with a strange and subtle expression. After all, Matthew, who was possessed by Galahad, was among them. Wu Ming looked over and saw that Lancelot's body had tensed up. This made Lancelot's legs exert a lot of strength. The powerful leg force caused a lot of pressure on the black horse's abdomen, causing the black horse to neigh. Hey, Sir Lancelot, your mount can't stand your strength. Be careful. Wu Ming immediately reminded. I'm sorry, Sir Villo, I've made a fool of myself. Lancelot's tensed body immediately relaxed. The former, I'm sorry, was said to his mount, and the latter was said to Wu Ming. Although it couldn't be compared to his mount when he was alive, this black horse had accompanied Lancelot for a long time. Lancelot also had some feelings for this black horse. Look at you. You don't seem to know that Galahad is the servant of Master Chaldea. Wu Ming's words made Lancelot feel awkward. I really don't know. Lancelot replied rather awkwardly. Although Lancelot had caught up with Gadotzi and the others, because of Osriel's interception, Lancelot didn't really meet with Gadotzi and even Matthew. He also didn't know that the person Galahad possessed was Matthew. Now that Wu Ming said this, Lancelot was shocked. But, Sir Villo, although I didn't have close contact with Master Chaldea, I saw Chaldea's group in the distance. It seems that my son isn't among them. This was true. Lancelot had caught up with Gadotzi and the others. Although he didn't do anything, Lancelot glanced at Chaldea's group from a distance. However, because the distance was too far, Lancelot couldn't effectively perceive Galahad's aura, and Lancelot didn't find his son, so he didn't pay attention. It's normal that you didn't notice because Galahad had given its power to a girl and then fell into a deep sleep. I see. Is it a demi-servant? Lancelot nodded. After all, he was also a regular servant. He still understood the operation of possessing others and falling into a deep sleep after handing over power. But, Lancelot, you don't seem to know anything. Wu Ming cast a strange look at Lancelot. Just from the fact that Lancelot didn't know that Wu Ming had been to the Holy City, it was enough to see that Lancelot's information was slightly outdated, not to mention that Lancelot also had a lot of mistakes in other aspects. This can't be helped. Lancelot smiled helplessly and shook his head. After all, a Grumman doesn't like me very much. Compared to the betrayal of others in a Grumman's eyes, Lancelot's betrayal was more shameful, so he was quite displeased with Lancelot. Not to mention that Lancelot himself also asked to stay outside the Holy City, which was what a Grumman wanted. In other information, a Grumman even deliberately withheld information and deliberately didn't tell Lancelot. Just like Wu Ming's matter, a Grumman deliberately didn't tell Lancelot. After all, Lancelot, as a guerrilla knight, ran around all day and basically didn't need any information, so a Grumman simply chose not to tell Lancelot. The order to intercept Gadotsi and the others was given to him by Egwene when he found out that Lancelot was in the vicinity of the Holy City, and he chose to attack. Before that, Lancelot didn't even know that Chaldea's people had come here. He only knew that Chaldea would come. You are really pitiful. Wu Ming helplessly shook his head. I don't feel pitiful, a Grumman doing this. I also feel that I am peaceful. After all, there were no complicated orders, which was also beneficial for Lancelot to find Wu Ming. Although now he found him and also found his son. Son? Wait a minute. Lancelot stopped the horse. My son seems to have become a daughter? Chapter 734. That's true, but whether the other party recognizes you as his father, or not is another matter. Wu Ming attacked mercilessly. Wu Ming was not very familiar with Matthew, but he was not a stranger either. In Wu Ming's opinion, Matthew was not the kind of child who would casually recognize others as his father, but this was not certain. After all, Matthew's spirit base belonged to Galahad, and refugees would be affected. Lancelot fell into a deep silence. Unlike Wu Ming, Lancelot thought that he had a good relationship with Galahad. But because of this, Lancelot could clearly realize that Galahad was actually very strict with him as a father. When the king went astray, he did not intervene in time. Instead, he let the king go and even joined the king on the wrong path. With what he was doing now, he was afraid that Galahad would not recognize him. After all, Galahad had obtained the Holy Grail and was known as the Holy Grail Knight. Even if there were other secrets, it could not cover up Lancelot's mistake. Even if Matthew was not the real Galahad and was only possessed by Galahad, Galahad's feelings for him were likely to affect Matthew. Therefore, in Lancelot's opinion, his daughter, son, might be quite angry, and it was also very likely that they would not recognize him as their father. Don't be so negative. If you admit your mistake, I think Galahad or Matthew will forgive you. Wu Ming smiled and patted Lancelot on the shoulder. However, Lancelot just sighed and lowered his head helplessly. I hope so. During this conversation they almost reached Lancelot's base. This place is very remote. Looking at the house with a sharp corner surrounded by the hills in front of him, Wu Ming, who was walking all the way, commented. When I was looking for you in the wilderness, I accidentally found this secluded place, Lancelot explained. But there was one thing that Wu Ming was quite puzzled. This shouldn't be your base outside the Holy City, right? Wu Ming didn't mean anything else. He just felt that this place didn't look like a base for the external knights of the Holy City. Even if it wasn't on the plains, it had to be built in a terrain that fit the style of a knight. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to get past Egwene. Words like, "You're not fit to be my king's knight," "It's not proper to be an outpost of the Holy City in such a secluded place," and so on would definitely be used by Egwene. If it was Egwene, he would definitely say something like that. Moreover, he would be suspected of targeting Lancelot. That was why Wu Ming said that this place didn't look like an outpost of the Holy City, but more like a hidden secret base. Is that what you want to say, Lord Villo? Wu Ming nodded. There was no other reason other than this place was too advantageous as a secret base. Indeed, this is not where my troops are stationed, Lancelot explained to Wu Ming. Oh, could it be that it's really as I guessed? Wu Ming's interest was piqued. Although he was suspicious, it was just a guess. Did he get it right? Lancelot didn't say much. He just nodded slightly and then signaled the knights behind him to go ahead first. The knights behind Lancelot responded and accelerated in unison. They rushed from both sides of Lancelot and Wuming towards the base that was surrounded by many low hills. After the knights left, Wuming and Lancelot rode their horses and slowly walked forward. "Lord Villo, as you know, I don't agree with my king's way of doing things," Lancelot began to explain to Wuming. Lancelot just couldn't betray Artoria again, so he chose to side with her. In other words, it was reasonable that Lancelot disagreed with Artoria's way of doing things. "If I meet refugees in the wild, I'll protect them without the knowledge of the other knights of the Round Table and my king. In front of us is the place where the refugees live." Lancelot was indeed the hesitant Lancelot. Although he chose to side with Artoria, he still chose to do some dirty tricks in private. Of course, it was a dirty trick for the Holy City, but in Wuming's eyes, Lancelot did a good job. "Good job, Lancelot. If Galahad knows about this, he'll definitely be impressed." Lancelot accepted Wuming's compliment. "I've been on the wrong path. Even if I were to do it again, I wouldn't do it exactly the same way." Lancelot meant that even if he chose to side with Artoria, he wouldn't kill the refugees unless it was Artoria's order. Compared to Gawain and the others who were rigid, Lancelot was more flexible. As a knight, he couldn't betray Artoria again, but he would save the refugees in private. There was no doubt that Lancelot, who was on the Lion King's side, was cleared up a lot. Of course, Lancelot also had a little selfish motive. In order not to disappoint his son as a father, Lancelot naturally had to take action. Now that his son had become a daughter, Lancelot believed that he had to work harder. The soul of daughter control burn. *****. Let's go and see this secret base of yours. Ignoring Lancelot's soul of daughter control burning face, Wuming urged his horse to speed up. Seeing Wuming speeding up, Lancelot, who realized what was going on, also sped up his horse to catch up with Wuming. A moment later, the scene of a post-disaster camp appeared in front of Wuming's eyes. Simple tent-like houses made of unknown materials were arranged in an orderly manner in the valley surrounded by hills. Wuming could see that these tent-like houses looked simple, but they were quite sturdy. At the very least, they could completely block the rain, snow and hail. "I've arranged knights to patrol the entrance and the hills. Plus, the terrain here is remote, so it can be used as a shelter for the refugees." Lancelot did a good job. There were patrolling knights around the camp, responsible for security. There were also many ordinary people walking between the tent-like houses. Judging from their clothes, they were indeed refugees. The refugees all had smiles on their faces. Although they were trying to find joy in the midst of hardship, their smiles were not fake. Because it was the Middle East, water was relatively scarce. However, Wuming unexpectedly saw a rather simple well in the corner. Chapter 735. "These refugees found it by accident," Lancelot explained. After all, Lancelot was a knight and not an expert in water conservancy. Naturally, he could not find a water source in this secret base. As natives of the Middle East, although it was not their specialty, these refugees naturally had some ways to find a water source. However, they did not expect there to be a water source here. Therefore, an extremely simple well was created. It had to be said that these refugees were really lucky to be rescued in a chaotic world. Not only did they have a safe place to live, but they also had a water source. As for food, Lancelot would regularly bring his knights to deliver food to the refugees. Although it was easy to attract the attention of the Holy City, it was not a problem to bring a small amount of food if the interval between visits was shortened. Although they did not bring a lot of food each time, the frequency was high. As Lancelot was a guerrilla knight, there was no problem for him to run around every day. Lancelot would come here once every few days to deliver food to the refugees. Sometimes it would be 1 or 2 days, sometimes it would be 2 or 3 days. The refugees had been suffering from hunger before and had scrimped on food. In addition to Lancelot's frequent delivery of food, the refugees did not lack food. At the very least, they had food and shelter. These refugees were very satisfied. Unlike before, they didn't have any food to eat, and they didn't even know when they would die. Lancelot came this time to deliver food to the refugees. However, he happened to meet Wuming on the way and invited Wuming to come along. "Thank you for your hard work, Lancelot," Wuming said to Lancelot without turning his head as he looked at the knights distributing food to the refugees. "Of course not, Sir Villo. I'm just atoning for my sins." Lancelot did not feel that it was hard for him. In fact, it was in line with his knight's ethics and his way of survival. "Forget it as you wish." Wuming shook his head. After taking a look around the camp, Wu Ming said his goodbyes. After all, I came here because I was interested in hunting. I have other things to do, Wu Ming said. Sir Villo, are you going to the mountains in the north? Lancelot asked. That's right. I'm going to the mountain people's territory to look for Chaldea's master. Wu Ming had no doubt that Lancelot had guessed his next move. The Knights of the Round Table were not only outstanding in terms of bravery, but also in terms of intelligence. They would not be able to lead troops into battle. Of course, some of the more special Knights of the Round Table were exceptions. Lancelot, you'd better continue to be a guerrilla knight. I'll look for you when the time comes. When Wu Ming said, when the time comes, he actually did not know when that time would come. After all, things were always changing. Lancelot could be used like the Skywings as a trump card. Well then, Sir Villo, I won't see you off. Besides, staying in the same place for a long time isn't the style of a guerrilla knight like me. I'm going to leave as well. Wu Ming nodded. He wasn't so pretentious that he needed someone to send him off. Then I'll take my leave first. Sir Villo. Just as Wu Ming was about to leave, he suddenly heard Lancelot call out to him. Jim? Wu Ming turned to look at Lancelot. As if he did not dare to look Wu Ming in the eye, Lancelot silently lowered his head. The person the Queen likes is you. There's nothing between the Queen and me. If you feel that I've tarnished the Queen's reputation, you can take my life at any time. I won't complain. Lancelot's tone was heavy and self-reproachful. Although Lancelot was trying to save Guinevere, who had almost been burned at the stake, his actions had indeed tarnished Guinevere's reputation. Don't worry, Lancelot. I don't take this matter to heart. Not only did he trust Lancelot, but he also trusted Guinevere. To be honest, Lancelot had fought side by side with him for many years. He knew Lancelot very well. Lancelot could indeed do such a thing. But the most important thing was that Wu Ming believed in Guinevere. Guinevere had been secretly in love with him for many years. Because of Artoria, Guinevere had been enduring until Wu Ming left. It wasn't unreasonable for Guinevere to fall for Morgan Le Fay's scheme so easily. Guinevere was madly in love with Wu Ming. That kind of madness made Guinevere, a heroic spirit, sublimated. Although Guinevere looked weak when he met Wu Ming before, Guinevere appeared as a berserker. Although he couldn't cheat like ruler, Wu Ming could still distinguish the ranks. This reminded Wu Ming of the berserker Kyoheim he met in the American Singularity. Fortunately, Guinevere's madness was different from Kyoheim's. The different madness allowed Guinevere to gain different abilities from Kyoheim. Guinevere couldn't lie to Wu Ming. Although Wu Ming didn't know this, Wu Ming could see from Guinevere's eyes that Guinevere didn't lie. That was enough. After all, trust was quite important. Of course, this didn't mean that Wu Ming didn't believe in Lancelot, but Guinevere was more trustworthy. Moreover, Lancelot, who didn't have much contact with Guinevere, didn't have a good impression of Guinevere. In a joking way, defeated dog Lancelot was a good title. Asterisk Sigma Forel. Lancelot didn't serve as Guinevere's guard knight, and they didn't have a long bond, plus he missed Wu Ming. Guinevere's impression of Lancelot in his mind was just a knight loyal to the king and a knight who worshipped Wu Ming. Guinevere has explained it to me. Don't overthink. Just focus on your own things. You should know that Galahad is a singularity. Let's not talk about others, but at the very least, don't disappoint Galahad. Yes. Villo, Sama, I will remember your words. Lancelot, who was touched by Wu Ming's trust and relationship, was moved by Wu Ming's knight's salute. Then I'll leave first. After Wu Ming finished, he waved his hand and a black-purple ripple appeared, engulfing Wu Ming's body and then disappeared. Looking at the place where Wu Ming disappeared, Lancelot looked serious and said slowly, Villo, Sama, I will live up to your expectations. Chapter 736. Wu Ming left. After checking the surroundings, Lancelot also left with his troops. This camp was still very safe, so there was no need for too much protection. If they did that, it might even attract attention. This was why Wu Ming didn't take any protective measures against the camp. On the other side, inside Abendheim's body. In the monitoring room that Abend specially built for Wu Ming, Gilliel was lying on her back in boredom, floating in the air like a rootless duckweed. Master is so slow, why isn't he back yet? Gilliel said in boredom. Abend had now arrived at the northern mountainous area and had stayed here for quite some time. This gave people the feeling that Wu Ming has been gone for a long time. However, this wasn't the case. After Wu Ming left Abend's body, he landed on the ground and waited for Lancelot to start counting, chatting with Lancelot, following Lancelot to the refugee camp, and finally visiting and staying in the camp. Although this series of events took some time, it definitely wasn't long. At most it would take 1 or 2 hours. The long time that Gopral mentioned was just her own complaint. However, it was normal for Gilliel to be so bored. Even if it was only half an hour, it was a boring time that was difficult for Gilliel to pass. However, this was the real Gilliel, wasn't it? At this moment, a dark purple portal suddenly appeared beside the sofa, and a person wearing east wind clothing walked out of the ripples. This person was Wuming. "Master, you're finally back." Gilliel was like a bird returning to its nest. The wings on her back flapped as she flew toward Wuming. "I'm back, Gilliel." Wuming first smiled as he answered Gilliel, then spoke again. "After I left, you didn't mess around, did you, Gilliel?" Wuming still looked at Gilliel with a smile, but this smile was so cold in Gilliel's eyes. Iciness caused Jillian, who was flying in the air, to stop instantly. Then Jillian obediently descended from the air. How could that be? "I'm sure I didn't mess around, Master. You have to believe me." Seeing Wuming's clenched fists, Gopral hurriedly explained with a yawn. Wuming smiled as he walked up to Gopral and raised his hand. Jillian closed her eyes subconsciously. Then she felt a palm stroking her head. Gopral opened her eyes and coincidentally saw Wuming retract his hand from Gopral's head. That's right, Wuming was actually stroking Jillian's head. "Seeing that I'm in a good mood, I'll let you off today." After Wuming finished speaking, he turned around and sat on the sofa. Gilliel, who had been left in a daze, came to her senses and touched her head uncomfortably. She was not used to Wuming being so gentle to her. After all, every time he Wuming he would knock on her head. This sudden touch left Gilliel at a loss. Ever since she became Wuming's dependent, Gilliel had never considered whether Wuming trusted her as a subordinate, or the question of her loyalty to Wuming. Firstly, she believed in the former master of the Skywings, Arthas, and also believed that Arthas was the new master they had found. Secondly, no matter who the master was as a weapon, she just had to do her job well. Therefore, Gilliel's attitude toward Wuming was very casual. Although Wuming often knocked on Gilliel's head, that did not mean that Wuming hated her. It was just a casual, small punishment. Gilliel naturally understood this, so she did not mind. However, habit was a scary thing. Having gotten used to being knocked on the head, she was not used to the sudden touch. "In any case, I don't have to suffer." Gilliel smiled. After all, Wuming was likely to be their master for life if nothing went wrong, so she just had to follow in his footsteps. Gilliel gently flapped her wings and flew behind Wuming, looking like she had not learned her lesson. Wuming naturally noticed Gilliel's abnormality, but Wuming did not do anything. If he did something right, he would be rewarded, and if he did something wrong, he would be punished. If he was in a good mood, Wuming did not mind giving out extra rewards such as a pat on the head. If he was in a bad mood, Wuming did not mind giving out extra punishments such as a spanking. Perhaps it was this calmness that made Gilliel become more and more impudent. Not thinking about this anymore, Wuming looked at the virtual screen that Abent had brought up again. It showed the scene of the mountainous area below. "Abent isn't slow." Wuming sighed. Wuming had visually estimated the distance and estimated the time Abent would take, but Abent still gave Wuming a pleasant surprise. Although his body was rather large, Abent was not like those massive creatures. He still had the advantage of speed. When Wuming returned, Gilliel's bored look indicated that Abent had been here for a while. Although he did not know the exact time, this also meant that Abent was not slow. After all, Abent is a fantasy breed, Master. That's a race that's close to God. Abent, who was able to follow Arthu, was one of the best among fantasy breeds, so his speed was naturally not slow. As expected of Abent. Wuming praised Abent. "Then Abent, can you find a village in these mountainous areas?" Wuming said while looking at the magic screen. Abent was indeed above the mountainous area, but it was not small. Logically speaking, when looking down from the sky, it should be very easy to find the place he wanted to find, not to mention finding a village in the mountainous area. Logically speaking, it should be very conspicuous. However, because Abent was too high up, he could not see the exact situation on the ground. If he shrank it, he would only be able to see the specific situation of a small area. Thus, Wuming asked Abent if he could find a village in the mountainous area. Wuming thought that if it really did not work, he would contact Azrael and give it a try. With the contract of the dependent incarnation, Wuming could naturally contact Azrael, but because he needed to reduce the consumption of magic power, Wuming closed his connection with the other Skywing breeds, only keeping the identity of master and servant. But before Abin could answer, Giliel answered first. There's no need to go through so much trouble, master. Below where we are now is actually a village. Chapter 737. As if to confirm Gopril's words, Abant activated the magic power virtual screen and continuously shrunk the map below him. Immediately after, a village built on a mountain as if the mountain had been modified appeared in front of Wuming. Abant's operation was very similar to a real map, which made Wuming's eyes light up. You're really becoming more and more modern. Well done, Abant. Actually, we were just lucky. When Abant stopped and explored below, we discovered that there was a village below Abant. It's most likely the mountain people that Master is looking for. Gopril answered Wuming in a rather serious tone, not minding that she used the word we. If one ignored this sentence and thought about it, it was normal for Abant to be able to discover the village below him. As a weapon with a good sense of war, Abant would definitely check if there were any threats around him in an unfamiliar environment, especially below him. Abant was a complete fantasy breed, but fantasy breeds were also animals, and animals still valued their abdomens. However, it was also because of this that Abant discovered the village of the mountain people, which saved Wuming the effort of finding them. In that case, Gopril, come down with me and take a look, Wuming said as he stood up. Really, master? Instead, it was Giliel who became excited. After all, Wuming had refused to bring Gopril out with various reasons, so Gopril had no choice but to stay. This time she could finally go out to play and help. How could Gopril not be excited? I feel bad about leaving you here all the time, but I'll say this in advance. Don't cause me trouble. Wuming was giving her a sweet date, but the effect was quite obvious to Gopril. Yes, master. I know. Therefore, Wuming brought Gopril, who was full of flattery and smiles, into the portal. Below Abant, in the village built on the mountain. The simple and unadorned villagers worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. Even if there wasn't enough food and the water wasn't clean, they weren't dispirited because of this, and they didn't frown because of the war. Although the war did not affect them to a certain extent, it could be seen from this that the people of the mountains were optimistic. However, optimism did not mean that the mountain people were brave. At this moment, they were frightened by the sudden appearance of the black-purple ripples at the village entrance. Because the village wasn't very big and it was daytime, the villagers were all busy. Therefore, the abnormality at the entrance of the village instantly attracted everyone's attention. Quickly go and find Lord Hundred Faces? It was not known who shouted, but someone immediately reacted. A few thin and light youths who looked like they could run quickly volunteered themselves and ran towards the houses in the village behind them. However, they did not think that with so many villagers noticing the abnormality at the entrance of the village, how could Hassan, an inhuman existence, not notice it? Before those young people could run far, a black figure appeared in front of them. It was a petite and muscular figure. Her body was only wrapped in a few pieces of simple cloth. Although she was not big, the slightly bulging female sexual characteristics proved that she was a woman. The most special thing was that she wore a skull mask on her face. There was no doubt that she was one of Hassan, or rather, she was the Lord Hundred Faces in the villagers' mouths. Lord Hundred Faces, you're here. As if they had found their pillar of support, the villagers gathered around Hassan, who was a man of many faces. Hurry up and get away from here. If there is a battle, then go to the underground caves and the surrounding mountain walls to take refuge first, Hassan said to the surrounding villagers with a solemn expression. Yes, Lord Hundred Faces. The villagers immediately responded. They all knew their limits. If they insisted on staying, there was no doubt that they would add a burden to Hassan. Moreover, if the enemy was weak and did not need their help, Hassan alone could handle it. If the enemy was strong, they would naturally be useless as a burden. Immediately afterward, the villagers began to retreat to the village behind them. If they took a few steps back in advance, they could quickly leave if something happened. At this moment, the black-purple ripples suddenly changed. Like a stone entering the water, the black-purple ripples were stirred. Then, a black-haired, red-eyed boy in local costume and a lovely girl with wings came out. It was naturally Wuming and Gopril. The handsome man and the beautiful woman made the villagers a little overwhelmed for a while and relaxed their vigilance. Who are you? Hassan asked Wuming vigilantly. She saw that the two people in front of her were servants. On Wuming's side, because someone took the lead to ask him a question as soon as he came out, Wuming was stunned. He was a little surprised by the scene in front of him, but he could accept it because it was reasonable. Because of the vision provided by Abanthi, Wu Ming's portal could be opened in this village, but Wu Ming did not expect that the portal he opened would directly open at the entrance of the village, and it was seen by a group of villagers. The strange black-purple ripples naturally brought panic to the villagers, and it also brought suspicion to Hassan. The solution to this situation was to express goodwill. The best way to clear up misunderstandings was to be honest, such as answering the other party's questions truthfully. I am a servant of the Saber rank, real name is Vilo Sarenseed. This is the servant of the Berserker rank that I summoned, real name is Gopril. What? Hassan was stunned. For Hassan, who had hundreds of personalities and mastered hundreds of skills, it was easy to judge whether a person was lying through their expression and language. She could see that the other party was not lying, but this was also what shocked Hassan. It wasn't strange for the other party to mention their class. After all, servants always referred to each other by their class. But what was strange was that when the other party mentioned their class, he also mentioned their real name. And it seemed that he was not lying. How could this not shock Hassan? As a servant, Hassan naturally knew the importance of the real name. The real name represented a weakness. If there was no big weakness, it would be fine. If there was a servant like Achilles and Siegfried who had quite obvious weaknesses, it was likely that they would be trapped. However, the other party did not seem to be famous. Gopril had never heard of it at all. As for Vilo Sarenseed, Hassan was shocked and entered the battle state. You are the Lion King's people? Chapter 738. The reason why Hassan thought that Wu Ming was the Lion King was because of the name Vilo Sarenth. Because the enemy was the Lion King, and the name of the Lion King's knights was the same as the name of the Knights of the Round Table. As a Hassan who mastered hundreds of skills, the knowledge of historical stories also existed. As a result, Hassan naturally had information about various heroes. Coincidentally, the information about the Knights of the Round Table was also in her mind. After investigation, she naturally investigated the Lion King who occupied the Holy City and his knights. She found that the Lion King's knights might be the Knights of the Round Table. Why was she so sure? It was because they were servants. The Lion King and his knights who suddenly appeared defeated the Lionheart King after a fierce battle and occupied the Holy City. This was not the era of Huga Hassan. Huga Hassan also understood that she herself was a follower. Therefore, Huga Hassan guessed that the Lion King of the Holy City and his knights were also followers. After knowing that the Lion King's knights had the same name as the Knights of the Round Table, she doubted whether the Lion King was King Arthur. However, because the Lion King lived in seclusion, and the Holy City was extremely difficult to sneak in, Hassan had never seen the Lion King. However, Hassan had seen a few people like Gawain, Lancelot, Agul, Mordred, Tristan and the like. Not only her, but her compatriots, Cursed Wrist Hassan and Drunk Smoke Hassan had also seen those people. According to the books, those people were most likely the Knights of the Round Table. Vilo Sarenth was also the name of the Knights of the Round Table. Together with the Knights of the Round Table in the Holy City, it was impossible for Hassan not to misunderstand. I'm Vilo Sarenth, a Knight of the Round Table, but I'm not from the Holy City, Wu Ming explained helplessly. Wu Ming changed into the clothes of the Eastern Wind because he was afraid that the mountain people would think that he was a Knight of the Round Table. This was realized. Wu Ming didn't have a problem with revealing his weakness if he revealed his name. The reason why Wu Ming told Wu Ming his real name was because he had no weaknesses, so he was not afraid of being targeted. Gopril was even more so because she was a guest from another world. In addition, Wu Ming didn't think that anyone would recognize him, so he reported his name without hesitation. But he didn't expect the servant in front of him to recognize the character that his name represented. I can only say that as expected of Hassan. Wu Ming sighed inwardly. As an assassin, her ability to gather information was naturally not weak. Wu Ming did not know much about the Middle East. In Wu Ming's opinion, there should not be any books about the Knights of the Round Table here, which was shrouded in war and apocalypse. However, Wu Ming did not think that Hassan might have known about the Knights of the Round Table for a long time. You want to lie to me? Don't even think about it. Hassan didn't listen to Wu Ming. If her analysis was correct, the Lion King was King Arthur, and she had never seen a Knight of the Round Table who was independent of the Holy City's forces. Damn Knight. Not only did you harm my compatriots but you also want to kill all of us. I will never let you go. Hassan rushed to Wu Ming as if he was blinded by anger. In an instant, silhouettes of different sizes and genders appeared beside Hassan. Clones of the spiritual base? You are Hassan of the Round Table. Wu Ming saw the identity of Hassan of the Round Table at a glance. The assassin class card made by Julian contained the power of almost all Hassans except the first Hassan. As someone who had studied the assassin class card, Wu Ming naturally understood the ability of each Hassan. To be able to create a large number of clones that were not illusions, except for Hassan of the Round Table, who was now known as the existence of multiple personalities, there should be no Hassan who could do it. And you say you are not from the Holy City? Hassan of the Round Table responded angrily. Those who were familiar with her were either her friends or her enemies. She naturally couldn't be friends with any Knights of the Round Table, so there was only one answer. Enemy. Die. Countless figures surrounded Wu Ming and Gapril, and then swarmed up as if they were going to fight to the death. Wu Ming saw that the other party did not listen to his explanation and shook his head helplessly. Could it be that because the other party had multiple personalities, he had some mental problems? Wu Ming remembered that Gadotsi also said that they had met Hassan of the Round Table when they were in the desert. When the other party saw the pattern on Matthew's shield, he thought that Matthew was from the Holy City and directly abandoned the kidnapped Niticles and ran away. Wu Ming decided not to explain to the mental patient, and beat him first. Gapril, Wu Ming said casually. Yes, Gapril responded with a smile, and then the magic power in her body was released. The magic power that was comparable to a low-level noble relic was released and instantly broke the clones of the Round Table that surrounded Wu Ming and Gapril. Although Gapril's magic power release broke many of the clones, there were still many clones around the village entrance. Damn it. At least we have to buy time for the villagers. Hassan of the Round Table, as the main body, was hidden among the clones, looking at the villagers who had begun to retreat and gritted his teeth. Then one of the clones left and ran toward the villagers. The clones would give the villagers the direction of escape. The enemy was a Holy City Knight, and it was no longer safe to hide in the underground shelter of the mountain. Chapter 739. Giliel, 7 o'clock. Wu Ming did not even look at the 7 o'clock direction and said casually to Giliel. Understood. Giliel smiled cruelly, grabbed the energy scythe that appeared out of thin air, and rushed toward Wu Ming's 7 o'clock direction. How is this possible? Hassan's heart skipped a beat. She was at Wu Ming's 7 o'clock direction. But how did the opponent know? This was the first thought that popped up in Hassan's mind. However, this was a normal thing in Wu Ming's view. As early as when Hassan appeared in front of Wu Ming with his true body, she had nowhere to hide in Wu Ming's eyes. If Hassan did not appear in his true body at the beginning, Wu Ming would have to put in a lot of effort to find his true body. But now it was easy. The reason why Assassin was called Assassin was because Assassin had excellent concealment ability. However, Hassan, who had appeared in front of Wu Ming, had undoubtedly lost the advantage of excellent concealment. Wu Ming could easily find Hassan's true body. Finding 100 Faces Hassan's true body meant that 100 Faces Hassan was defeated. Because he could not resist Giliel's assault at all. Damn it. Hassan secretly cursed and commanded his doppelgangers to cover him. However, this was of no use. A berserker who did not lack magic power was not something an assassin who had lost the advantage of concealment could stop. Numbers might have a little effect in front of Giliel, but because Giliel had overused his clones, each clone had become quite weak. As mentioned earlier, Hassan's clones were weaker than his true body because the power of the clones came from his true body. When the true body split into clones, it meant that the true body was weakened. And the power that was weakened from the true body was divided into many parts, so naturally, it was not that strong. Therefore, in just an instant, the human wall formed by Hassan was violently broken through by Giliel. Wielding her magic scythe, Jillian slashed at her path in a disorderly manner. Due to Wu Ming's embodiment of authority, Gapril could use her mana without restraint. Every slash and slash contained a large amount of mana. Because Hassan's essence was multiple personalities, her clones were equivalent to people with different consciousnesses. Ah. Damn it. Die. Stop. Don't come any closer. Don't come over. The mana release transformed into a shockwave that the 100 Faces doppelgangers couldn't resist at all. There were too many of them and their power wasn't weak at all. Like different people, they all made noises. Among them, there were definitely those who were timid and scared out of their wits. There were also those who weren't afraid of death and wanted to risk their lives to attack Jillian. There were all kinds of personalities. After all, wasn't there multiple personalities? But that was not important. What was important was that Hassan was about to be captured alive. Under such circumstances, There was only one way for Baijiu Hassan to win, and that was to capture the leader first. Die. Hassan's voice came from behind Wu Ming, and Wu Ming could even feel a cold wind slashing at his neck. Baijiu Hassan was indeed an assassin. Relying on the cover of his clones, Baijiu Hassan successfully sneaked to Wu Ming's side and carried out the assassination. Giliel turned her head and looked at Baijiu Hassan, who appeared from the shadow behind Wu Ming and exclaimed, "Master?" After all, Giliel was not a heroic spirit. Giliel's current servant body was just a clone in Giliel's eyes. Giliel did not discover in time that Baijiu Hassan had slipped away and sneaked to Wu Ming's side. However, this did not mean that Wu Ming did not discover it. Wu Ming had been a servant many times, and he had also been an assassin because Wu Ming knew about the assassin class. With Wu Ming's understanding of the assassin class, although Baijiu Hassan's behavior was not showing off his slight skill in front of an expert, it was ineffective against Wu Ming. Clatter, the sound of chains rang behind Wu Ming and Baijiu Hassan groaned. Ugh! Wu Ming unhurriedly turned his head and looked behind him. The purple-haired woman with the skull mask was pouncing forward, and there was a dagger in her forearm. The dagger was only a few centimeters away from Wu Ming's neck. However, Wu Ming did not panic at all, because at this moment, Baijiu Hassan's body was wrapped in silver-white chains that exuded a purple aura. That was the annihilation lock that merged with Wu Ming's authority incarnation. Baijiu Hassan's limbs and body were tightly entangled by the annihilation lock that appeared from the void. Because Wu Ming was wary of Assassin's body, Baijiu Hassan's palms and fingers were entangled. Otherwise, with Baijiu Hassan's skills, he could send the dagger into Wu Ming's throat at such a distance by moving his fingers. Wu Ming looked at Baijiu Hassan's skull mask and fell into silence. Not to mention it was quite scary to look at such a close distance. However, it was also because of such a close distance that Wu Ming also discovered that Baijiu Hassan's mask seemed to be able to be taken off. Although he knew that Hassan's mask was inlaid on his face after shaving off his face, he always had to look at the real thing, right? King Arthur was a woman, so maybe Hassan did not have to dig out his face and then inlay a skull mask on it like in the records. You're a girl, so why are you wearing a skull mask? Wu Ming said as he put his hand on Baijiu Hassan's face. You. He easily took off Baijiu Hassan's mask, revealing Baijiu Hassan's indignant face. It was not a delicate face. Although it was a little tanned, she was still a girl. However, looking at Baijiu Hassan's limbs and the slightly bulging muscles on his body, Wu Ming chose to remain silent. You bastard. Baijiu Hassan naturally saw the meaning in Wu Ming's eyes and roared angrily. She was a woman after all. Her skin was just a little tanned and a little more muscular. Did she have to look at people differently? Master, are you okay? At this moment, Gopral suddenly came to Wu Ming's side. Because Baijiu Hassan was captured, Annihilation Lock took effect, and all of Baijiu Hassan's clones had disappeared. The person who can kill your master hasn't been born yet. Wu Ming smiled and answered Gopral jokingly. However, Wu Ming was right. Even Wu Ming's biggest enemy now, Gidia, who had fused with part of the Black Mud, could not kill Wu Ming, at least for now. Wu Ming turned to look at Baijiu Hassan, ignoring Baijiu Hassan's angry expression and words. Wu Ming looked like he was going to negotiate. So, can we have a good talk, Baijiu Hassan? However, no negotiation would tie the other party up. Therefore, Wu Ming quickly let go of Hundred Faces Hassan. This practice proved Wu Ming's sincerity. Releasing Hundred Face Hassan was to prevent her from dying. It also showed that Wu Ming was not afraid that Hundred Face Hassan would run away, because he was very sincere. However, in Hassan's eyes, this was a naked insult. Firstly, he had released him when he was about to lose consciousness. It was obvious that he didn't want the interrogator to fall unconscious and continue the interrogation. Secondly, the other party was saying that it didn't matter if he let her go, and even if she ran away he would catch her again. These two were Hundred Face Hassan's inner understanding, so she was even angrier. Don't you think you can get any information from me? Give up. At that moment, Hundred Face Hassan was ready to commit suicide. But Wu Ming did not make a move because Giliel, who was next to Wu Ming, made a move. Swish! A girl's white arm flashed quickly, and her arm cut through the atmosphere with a loud sound. Boom! Only a boom sound was heard. Hundred Face Hassan's head was pressed to the ground by the soft arm, and smoke and dust were everywhere. The arm that attacked Hundred Face Hassan was Giliel's. Don't be too greedy, you monkey. Giliel's eyes were red, and her pupils turned into a big sword symbol. Giliel's wings spread out, and the magic that had been transformed was emitted from Giliel's wings, floating into the sky like smoke. Feathers fell from the sky slightly. They were the feathers that were blown into the sky because Giliel attacked Hundred-Face Hassan too quickly. Giliel's left hand grabbed Hundred-Face Hassan's face and pressed it deeply into the ground, and traces of blood flowed into the ground. Giliel's other hand was holding a pinkish-purple magic scythe, eager to try. This gave people the feeling that she would cut off Hundred-Face Hassan's head in the next moment. That was how Hundred-Face Hassan felt at that moment anyway. Not only that, Hundred-Face Hassan could see through the gaps between Giliel's fingers that Giliel's hand holding the scythe was trembling slightly. She's suppressing the urge to kill me? Hassan was shocked. He, who had hundreds of memories, could naturally see Jillian's current state. But she was not afraid of death, she was just afraid of Giliel's current state. She felt that the angel in front of her was a beast, and it was the kind that was angered. Death was not scary. What was scary was living a life worse than death. Although the other party did not do anything to him, the current Giliel gave Hundred-Face Hassan such a feeling. Calm down, Giliel. Wuming came behind Giliel and stroked Giliel's head. After all, Wuming was not a good person. Although he had a servant form and his faction was order, Wuming himself was not completely order. Compared to order, neutrality was more suitable for Wuming. Doing good deeds to good people and evil deeds to evil people. Having compassion but not excessive compassion for others. Having evil deeds but not indulging in evil deeds. Wuming was already very polite to Hundred-Face Hassan. He tried not to provoke a fight and defended himself. After the battle, he only wanted to capture Hundred-Face alive. He did not attack the villagers and showed mercy everywhere. However, Hundred-Face still did not appreciate it. Although Giliel followed Wuming for a short time, she was a person with a high EQ. She figured out Wuming's character through details in a short time, so she was angry with Hundred-Face Hassan. Hundred-Face Hassan was too hostile to Wuming or too hostile to the Knights of the Holy City, although the Knights of the Holy City had done a lot of evil things. To put it nicely, it was abhorrence of evil. To put it bluntly, it was self-righteous. Giliel believed that Hundred-Face Hassan was no longer worthy of Wuming's kindness. Hundred-Face Hassan was already an insult to Wuming. As Wuming's loyal subordinate, Giliel could not stand it, so she made a move. After being touched by Wuming for a while, Giliel, who calmed down a little, let go of Hundred-Face Hassan, and blood fell from Giliel's fingers. It was Hundred-Face Hassan's blood, not Giliel's. You're just a strand of magic power. At most, you're just the soul of a special monkey. Monkeys can't see the kindness of my master. Although Giliel had calmed down a little, her eyes were still red. It could be said that if Giliel didn't see that Wuming didn't want to cause trouble, she would have used Sky Strike to blast Hundred-Face Hassan to pieces. Hundred-Face Hassan fell into silence. By now, she also saw that there was something else going on. Chapter 741. Hundred-Faces Hassan was lying in the ground groove that matched his body size. This was caused by Gopril's huge force. On the surface, Hundred-Faces Hassan was a little stunned at the moment, as if he was beaten silly by Gopril. Blood flowed out from the back of Hundred-Faces Hassan's head, soaking the soil and making it bright red. When Gopril attacked Hundred-Faces Hassan was in a weak state, and Gopril's attack caused serious injuries to Hundred-Faces Hassan, but it was not fatal. Hundred-Faces Hassan was also a servant. As long as the brain in charge of thinking and the core located in the heart were not destroyed, Hundred-Faces Hassan would not die, or he could still be saved. So, Hundred-Faces Hassan struggled and sat up slowly. Although the injury she suffered was not fatal, it was still quite uncomfortable. At the beginning, Hundred-Faces Hassan felt that her ribs were basically all broken. "Are you really not from the Holy City?" Hundred-Faces Hassan said in a weak voice. After experiencing the intimidation of the beast Gopril, Hundred-Faces Hassan, who was blinded by anger because of hatred for the Holy City Knight, also calmed down, or she got rid of the anger she deliberately fell into before. In fact, when Wuming defended himself, Hundred-Faces Hassan also had a trace of doubt before, but compared to believing that Wuming, who was wearing the skin of the Holy City Knight, was a good person, Hundred-Faces Hassan was more inclined to believe that Wuming was a bad person. The reason was simple, that was Hundred-Faces Hassan's responsibility to the villagers. If what Wuming said was true, then nothing would happen to the villagers, but if Wuming lied to her, then the villagers were likely to be wiped out. Hundred Faces Hassan had the ability to detect microexpressions, so he also had the ability to see if a person was lying, but was there such a possibility? Assuming that Wuming was not hostile, but the people behind him or the higher-ups of the holy city Lion King were hostile to the villagers, exposing the village to Wuming would result in the villagers being wiped out. And who knew if Wuming had the means to deceive her skills? If Wuming said that he was good at micro-expressions, he could also deceive her. If the villagers' lives were lost because of Hundred Faces Hassan's carelessness, Hundred Faces Hassan would not forgive herself. And if Wuming was not a bad person, then at least the other party would not kill him. Therefore, with a similar principle of better to kill the wrong than to let the wrong person go, Hundred Faces Hassan chose to enter a state of anger to test Wuming's authenticity. Because putting Wuming on the enemy's side was the safest thing to do at present. He could only say that she was indeed a mental patient with multiple personality disorder. Not only did she think too much, but she also thought too much. If Wuming knew Hundred Looks Hassan's inner thoughts, he would definitely ridicule him. Why did she say that all-faced Hassan was outrageous? It was because she had made a wrong bet, and a very wrong one at that. Wuming had the ability to capture her alive in an instant. As a result, Hundred Faces Hassan could not complete the judgment of whether Wuming was good or evil. Judging whether a person was good or evil could only be done in an extreme state. As for Wuming, who captured her alive, Hundred Faces Hassan could not judge at all. However, these were not in the way. The most important thing was still Gopro. Gopro was quite angry at Hundred Faces Hassan's rudeness. Gopro's sudden attack not only shocked Hundred Faces Hassan but also almost made her leave the stage. As mentioned before, if it were not for Gopro holding back because of Wuming, Hundred Faces Hassan would have been killed by Gopro, sent back to the Martyr's Palace and left the stage. Of course it's true. Gawain and the others chose to be loyal to our king who has embarked on the wrong path, but I didn't. I maintained the virtues of a knight. In short, I'm a genuinely good person, Wuming answered Hundred Faces Hassan with a righteous face. Gopro looked at Wuming with a dumbfounded expression. Wuming's words made Gopro, who had calmed down a little after Wuming touched her heart, feel her heartbeat accelerate again. To put it simply, she was shocked. It was still the same sentence. Although it had only been a short time, Gopro thought she was quite familiar with her current master. Although her master was not considered a bad person, he could not be classified as a genuinely good person. However, as Wuming's subordinate, Gopro naturally would not tear down her master's stage in front of outsiders, so Gopro honestly chose to shut up and averted her gaze from Wuming. When Gopro shifted her gaze, Wuming looked at Gopro vaguely, his eyes full of satisfaction. Although Wuming did not guess Hundred Faces Hassan's thoughts, as Gopro said, Wuming was not a good person, nor was he a kind man. Wuming treated people with sincerity, but Hundred Faces Hassan treated Wuming like this. How could Wuming not teach Hundred Faces Hassan a lesson? It could be said that Gopro's sudden attack on Hundred Faces Hassan was the result of Wuming's indulgence. After all, how could Wuming, who had the willpower, not detect Gopro's location? Wuming had been using the willpower since he came to this village, and it was also because of the willpower that he locked onto Hundred Faces Hassan's body. I'm here to find Chaldea's master and prepare to give her the Holy Grail. I need Chaldea's help to repair this singularity, Wuming said, taking out a large golden cup from the golden ripples that suddenly appeared beside him. There was no doubt that it was the Holy Grail. Sure enough, the moment the Holy Grail was taken out, Hundred Faces Hassan was shocked. As a servant, Hundred Faces Hassan naturally knew about the existence of the Holy Grail. This made the doubts in Hundred Faces Hassan, who was still doubting Wuming, dissipate a lot. And I once saved Hassan and a lot of refugees from Drist. They can prove it for me, but it shouldn't be easy. Wuming really didn't expect to find Hassan and the refugees. After all, they must be in this mountain. Even if Hassan has a means of communication, it can't be contacted in a short time. Do you know the name of that Hassan? Hundred Faces Hassan suddenly asked. I remember listening to the refugee's name for that Hassan. It should be Smoke-Drunk Hassan, Wuming said thoughtfully. Hearing Wuming's words, Hundred Faces Hassan's eyes lit up. Wuming naturally caught on to this point and thought to himself, could it be that there's a chance? I know where the refugees saved by Smoke-Drunk Hassan are. It can't be the refugees who just escaped, right? Wuming said jokingly. However, Hundred Faces Hassan nodded. Wuming smiled helplessly. He was right. Chapter 742. You're quite assured. Wu Ming said to Hundred Faces Hassan in a puzzled tone. Don't look at Wu Ming's unintelligent appearance. Wu Ming knew that he was not completely classified as a good person in Hundred Faces Hassan's heart. Why was Wu Ming so sure? It was because Wu Ming had information about Hundred Faces Hassan. Hundred Faces Hassan was a multiple personality disorder patient with at least dozens of personalities. Now, if you want to do something to them, I can't stop you. Hundred Faces Hassan responded to Wu Ming weakly. He also looked at the villagers who had just left the village and had not gone far. Similarly, Wu Ming also looked at the villagers. These villagers left from another entrance of the village. They did not go far at all. There were even a small number of villagers who had just left the village on the other side. After all, the battle between Hundred Faces Hassan, Wu Ming, and Gopril ended too quickly. Those villagers were not servants. Such a short time was not enough for them. My compatriots' lives are over there. Anyway, I can't stop you. If what you said is true, then prove it to me. Hundred Faces Hassan stared at Wu Ming's eyes and said in a serious tone. However, Hundred Faces Hassan's tone made Gopril angry again. You bastard. Gopril let out a murderous aura. All Faces Hassan's fearless attitude, or rather the attitude of throwing caution to the wind, made Gopril quite unhappy. As expected of Berserker. You're really easy to get angry. Your master hasn't gotten angry yet. Hundred Faces Hassan looked at Gopril, unwilling to admit defeat. Anyway, the worst result was to be killed and return to the martyr's palace. If Wu Ming is really a good person, a few words of ridicule will definitely not let him kill me. This was Hundred Faces Hassan's current thought. All right, Jillian. Don't be angry. Maybe we'll be friends in a while, Wu Ming said as he pressed down on Jillian's shoulder. As soon as these words came out, Jillian's anger was instantly extinguished as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her. According to his master's personality, if he were to prove his identity to the villagers, there was a possibility that he would become one of them. And if they became allies, then they couldn't casually attack their own people. Wouldn't he have to teach this guy a lesson? The way Gilio looked at Bayan Hassan became unfriendly once again. This sent a chill down Hassan's spine and he swallowed his saliva. Then Gopril turned to look at Wu Ming with a smile. Yes, master, you go ahead first, I'll take care of this monkey here. No? Just as Hundred Faces Hassan was about to retort, Gilio suddenly pressed her hand on Hundred Faces Hassan's mouth. Because Hundred Faces Hassan was injured and weak, even if he used both hands, he couldn't pry Gilio's hand away from his mouth. He could only whimper there. Are you sure you can take care of her? Looking at Gilio, who was still smiling at him with one hand covering Hundred Faces Hassan's mouth, Wu Ming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Of course, after all, this monkey became like this mainly because of me. If there were people who were not familiar with Gilio, they might think that Gilio was a good person. However, Wu Ming was familiar with Gilio. He naturally knew that with Gilio's personality, she would never be so gentle to ask to take care of someone. Immediately afterward, Gilio continued. Master, don't forget that I have the authority you gave me. Although that is your authority, I seem to be able to use it too. Gilio was right. Vitality incarnation was stored in Gilio's body. It could not only be used as a passive ability, but it could also be used as an active skill. However, its power was not that sufficient. However, for the current injuries suffered by Hundred Faces Hassan, Gilio's current ability was enough. Well, okay, then I'll leave it to you. Immediately Wu Ming nodded. Yes, please rest assured, I will definitely heal this monkey. Gilio tilted her head and replied with a smile. However, Hundred Faces Hassan's expression became even more desperate. At that moment, Wu Ming just smiled helplessly. Remember to be moderate. Then Wu Ming left. Hundred Faces Hassan whimpered in despair and watched Wu Ming, who ignored her, leave. Then she saw Gypsy's beautiful smile that made her heart beat faster. She saw the angel demon, smiling at her. Almost a few minutes later, Wu Ming returned to the village with a group of villagers. When he came back, Wu Ming had changed into the silver armor, but he was not wearing a helmet. After Wu Ming caught up with the villagers, under the panicked and fearful eyes of the villagers, he directly used magic power to materialize his full armor without saying a word. Then, without needing Wu Ming to speak, people who knew Wu Ming naturally appeared among the villagers. And these people who knew Wu Ming were naturally the refugees that Wu Ming saved. In this way, after Wu Ming explained the problem quite simply, the villagers were relieved. Simply put, it was actually a big misunderstanding which made the villagers feel awkward. After that, the villagers who were saved warmly thanked them one by one. This caught Wu Ming a little off guard. After a very short exchange of greetings, the villagers followed Wu Ming back to the village. After being appeased, the villagers returned to their houses. After that, Wu Ming came to the place where Hundred Faces Hassan and Gilio were. Hyuga Hassan had a look of being played to death, as he slumped on the ground, while Gapril had a look of joy. But looking at Hundred Faces Hassan, it seemed that the injuries he suffered before had basically healed. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you, master. Gilio walked to Wu Ming's side. Looking at Hassan, who was slumped on the ground with an expression of being toyed with, and then looking at Gapril, who was smiling more and more happily, even if Wu Ming did not see what happened between the two, he could more or less guess it. Anyway, it's not a good thing. However, after all, Hundred Faces Hassan had been cured, so Wu Ming was not going to get to the bottom of what happened in the few minutes he was not here. Wu Ming looked at Hundred Faces Hassan. You saw it too. I didn't do anything to the villagers. Some of them do know me. Hundred Faces Hassan did not speak as if he was still immersed in the broken state. But at least he was one of Hassan, the avatar of a heroic spirit in human history. Hundred Faces Hassan quickly adjusted his state of mind. But his eyes were filled with shame and humiliation when he looked at Gilio. I know it's my mistake this time. I apologize to you here. In the end, Hundred Faces Hassan apologized honestly. So, can you answer us if we have any information about Master Chaldea? Chapter 743. Can you tell us, Master Chaldea, where is Tachika Fujimaru? Wu Ming asked directly. Unfortunately, I don't know. Hassan shook his head. This answer made Wu Ming frown involuntarily. It was not that Wu Ming was dissatisfied with Hassan, but he was a little irritated because he didn't get the information he needed for a long time. However, this was another matter in the eyes of Hassan. I didn't lie. I really don't know the information you said about the Master of Chaldea. There are only villagers in this village and I don't know the Master of Chaldea. Hassan tried his best to explain. After Hassan's explanation, Wu Ming also understood what was going on. There were indeed multiple Hassans in this endless mountain range, and there were even a lot of them. But that was before Wu Ming came to this singularity. After the confrontation with Lionheart King Charlie, Western Desert Sun King, and Sacred City Lion King, the Hassans died one by one. After all, Hassan's class was Assassin, the weakest of the 7 classes. In terms of servant attributes, the other classes could be said to be able to defeat the Assassin class. Only Caster could be compared to the Assassin class. Of course, this was the ranking among ordinary servants. If it was a crown servant, then the definition of the weakest class of the Assassin class did not count. Wu Ming still remembered the first Hassan who attacked him. That guy looked like Saber wearing the skin of the Assassin class. However, other Hassans were not so powerful except for the first Hassan. All in all, according to Hassan, many Hassans died in the hands of the enemy, and there were only 4 Hassans left. Cursed Hand Hassan, who was located in the eastern village, Quiet Hand Hassan, who was previously captured by the enemy, Smoky Drunk Hassan, who was rescued by Wu Ming and her Hassan. However, Quiet Hand Hassan was captured, Smoky Drunk Hassan was nowhere to be found, so the only one who still kept in touch with Hassan was Cursed Hand Hassan in the eastern village. Regarding the whereabouts of Drunk Smoke Hassan, Wu Ming felt that he might know where the other party went. Later Wu Ming spoke to Hassan. After being rescued by me, is Smoky Drunk Hassan going to sneak into the sacred city? Hassan froze for a moment, then nodded. She does have such an idea and she has already acted on it. For the problem of not being able to contact Smoky Drunk Hassan, in Hassan's view, it might be that Smoky Drunk Hassan had sneaked into the sacred city. However, Wu Ming's words made Hassan zzz. Smoky Drunk Hassan didn't sneak into the sacred city, she should have left. Left the arena? Hundred Faces Hassan did not react in time. Then Wu Ming told Hassan what he heard from the refugees waiting at the sacred city gate for Saint Uplift. What those people said about killing a leader of the mountain people, I think this leader should be referring to Smoky Drunk Hassan. After all, other than Hassan, there was no one else who could be the leader of the mountain people. Is that so? Smoky Drunk has left. Hassan looked a little disappointed. After all, she was still a compatriot and she was also a member of Hassan's family. She was closer to him than the other mountain people. But this is just my guess. After we find Chaldea's master, we will naturally know if it was Smoky Drunk Hassan who was killed at the sacred city gate. Wu Ming's words gave Hassan hope. That's true. Hassan nodded. Hassan had something to look forward to and a goal in his heart. In this way it was beneficial to both Wu Ming and Hassan himself. This was conducive to finding Gadotsi as soon as possible. Villo? Sir, I can almost guess where the master of Chaldea you mentioned is. After all, it was the person who defeated him easily, so Hassan awkwardly added the honorific sir. Just call me Villo. Wu Ming was uncomfortable with Hassan's awkward way of addressing him. Then Wu Ming probed into Hassan's question of almost guessing where the master of Chaldea is. In fact, Wu Ming had guessed it too. The place you're talking about should be Cursed Wrists village in the east. Gadotsi and the others must be with a certain Hassan in this mountain. However, Hassan said that there were only 4 Hassans left, and Quiet Hassan was captured and his fate was unknown. Smoky Drunk Hassan was also suspected to have left, and his fate was also unknown. Hassan did not know Gadotsi's whereabouts, so there was only Cursed Wrist Hassan left. I don't know if my luck is good or bad. Wu Ming smiled helplessly. He was lucky to find Hassan's village in a random search. However, Gadotsi seemed to be in another village, and this village was the final answer found by elimination. This could be called bad luck. However, I finally have a goal. This was considered a blessing in disguise. Then Wu Ming looked at Hassan. You should know where Cursed Wrist Hassan's village is. Wu Ming's meaning was clear. He wanted Hassan to take him to Cursed Wrist Hassan's village in the east. Yes, Mr. Villo. I know the location of Cursed Wrist's village in the east. Hassan did not take Wu Ming's suggestion. He still called him sir, sir. In fact, he had gotten used to it. Although Hassan nodded, he looked a little reserved as if there was something hidden. You're worried about these villagers, aren't you? Wu Ming saw through Hassan's thoughts. Yes, Mr. Villo. The Knights of the Holy City have not given up on us. If I leave, I'm afraid that the Knights will attack while I'm away. When it came to the lives of her compatriots, Hassan would not be careless. Regarding this matter, I have a good idea, Wu Ming said as he looked at Gopril who was behind him. Being stared at by Wu Ming like this, Gopril, who was humming a song, suddenly trembled. She stopped humming and froze on the spot. Wu Ming and Gopril stared at each other and no one spoke first. When Hassan was about to lose his patience, Gopril spoke first. Master, you don't want me to stay here to protect these monkeys, do you? However, Wu Ming acted as if he had heard wrongly. He put his hand on Gopril's shoulder and patted her twice. As expected of Gopril. I'm glad that you're willing to stay. Hassan looked as if he had seen a ghost. Gopril did not refute because she knew that it was useless to refute. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming looked at Baijiu Hassan. In that case, Hassan, go communicate with the villagers. We'll depart immediately. Okay. Chapter 744. In the end, Gopril, who looked reluctant but could not say anything, stayed in the village where Hassan was, which was referred to as the West Village. To be safe, Wu Ming also left a bounty thousands of meters above the West Village. At such a height, Wu Ming believed that no one would discover a bounty. With a bounty protecting the West Village from above, Wu Ming believed that even if the Knights of the Round Table came, there would be no casualties. After that, Wu Ming and Hassan left the West Village and set foot on the road to the village where Cursed Wrist Hassan was, which was referred to as the East Village. Starting from the West Village, almost an hour later in the mountains near the East Village, a black assassin and a white knight leaped here. These two were Hassan and Wu Ming who set foot on the road to the East Village. Because Hassan and Silent Wonder's agility was not low, the two of them were traveling at a very fast speed. On a slightly flat ground, Hassan, who was leading the way, stopped there. Like a chain reaction, Wu Ming naturally stopped as well. Mr. Villo, after crossing this mountain, we will reach the East Village. Hassan pointed to a small hill in front and explained to Wu Ming. Wu Ming nodded. In fact, 100 Faces Hassan's guidance was quite useful. The distance between the West Village and the East Village was not far, but the road between them was not so easy to walk. The mountains were steep and the cliffs were steep. It was not easy to walk or it was impossible to walk. Although Hassan led the way, this road was not impossible to walk, and reached a point where it was quite difficult to walk. It could be seen that Hassan played a considerable role. Of course, this so-called quite difficult to walk was only for Gadotsi. For Wu Ming there was no place that was difficult to walk. Because Wu Ming did not rely on his legs to walk, but he used telekinesis to fly. However, Hassan was still a great help. So Wu Ming thanked Hassan. Thank you for your hard work, Baijiu. However, Hassan shook his head as if he didn't care about Wu Ming's condolences. Immediately afterward, Hassan pleaded to Wu Ming. I have a request. I hope Mr. Villo can agree to it, please. It turned out that it was not that he did not care about Wu Ming's condolences, but he used this as a bargaining chip to ask for a favor from Wu Ming. For such a negotiation, Wu Ming did not mind, but Wu Ming would not simply agree to something unknown. First, tell me what you're here for. If it's part of my job, I definitely won't shirk from it. Hassan made his plea in a respectful tone. I hope you can rescue Tranquil Hassan. Tranquil Hassan, one of the 4 existing Hassans, was captured by the Knights of the Holy City, and his fate was unknown. This is not a problem, but do you know where Tranquil Hassan is now? Also, can you be sure that Tranquil Hassan is still alive? Saving people was naturally not a problem, but Wu Ming did not know Tranquil Hassan's current location. More importantly, whether Tranquil Hassan had already left. If the safety of Tranquil Hassan could not be guaranteed, then all this plan would become a dream. It's good that you can agree. Naturally, there is no problem with your 2 requests. There was a hint of joy on Hassan's face. Hassan did not care about Wu Ming's 2 questions. He only cared about whether Wu Ming would agree. I know Tranquil Hassan's location. It is a fortress used by the Knights of the Holy City to suppress mortals, and I can guarantee Tranquil Hassan's safety 100%. She has never left. Wu Ming was naturally puzzled by Huga Hassan's confident tone. Without needing Wu Ming to ask, Hassan gave an explanation himself. In fact, the reason why the other Hassans left was not because they were killed, but because they chose to commit suicide. Then these Hassans did not take away the Knights of the Round Table. And Tranquil Hassan was in a powerless state when she was captured, so she could not die with the enemy and could only be captured by the enemy. So that's how it is. Wu Ming immediately understood. It was not easy to catch a follower. It would be unwise not to capture her and torture her for information. That was why Hassan said that Tranquil Hassan's safety was guaranteed. So, will Tranquil Hassan try to commit suicide? Wu Ming asked again. After all, the previous Hassans were trying to perish together with the enemy in the end. It seemed that they were not willing to fall into the hands of the enemy. So, will Tranquil Hassan commit suicide in prison? Wu Ming would not doubt that Hassan did not have the means to commit suicide. The reason why the assassin was called an assassin was that he could kill others and himself. An assassin who couldn't even "I'll kill myself" was a little unqualified. So, in order to prevent the enemy from extracting information and not to let himself suffer, Tranquil Hassan should take advantage of the gap to commit suicide in prison. However, Hassan shook his head and slapped Wu Ming's face. Unfortunately, because of Tranquil Hassan's physique, she can't commit suicide. Wu Ming didn't want to talk. Since it's a physique problem, there is no way, Wu Ming said. Let's go. After finding Tachika, I will rescue Tranquil Hassan as soon as possible. Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Villo. Then the 2 went over the mountain and came to the back of the mountain. A village that was the same as West Village appeared in front of Wu Ming. It was also a small village built by the mountain and located on a small flat land. People in Middle Eastern costumes were busy. Although they were poor, everyone's face was full of smiles. Like the villagers of West Village, the villagers of East Village did not give up because of the war, but worked hard to live for tomorrow. This unique spirit that belonged to humans was what Wu Ming liked the most. Are you Lord Hundred Faces? Suddenly, a voice came into Wu Ming's ears and pulled Wu Ming back to reality. A woman at the entrance of the village was standing there, looking at Wu Ming and Hassan, who were standing not far away from the village entrance. Yes, is Cursed Wrist in the village? Hassan asked gently. It seemed that when facing her compatriots, Hassan would become extraordinarily gentle. Yes, Lord Hundred Faces, Lord Cursed Wrist is in the village at the moment. Also, welcome, Lord Hundred Faces, the woman greeted respectfully. Wu Ming could see that this was not respect between superiors and subordinates, but respect for the person who worshipped. This is. At this time, the woman also noticed Wu Ming and asked in a panic. My name is Villo Saransword. I am a knight, but I am not your enemy, so please don't panic, madam. Wu Ming elegantly performed a knight's salute to the woman and eased the atmosphere. A knight belonging to our people. What a coincidence, there are also 2 in our village. Hearing Wu Ming's words, the woman's face regained a smile. Then Wu Ming frowned because she said that there were 2 knights. Chapter 745. According to the words of the woman in front of him, Wu Ming could judge that there was a knight-type servant in this village. There was no accident, it should be Matthew. In this way he could also confirm that Gadazzi and Da Vinci were here. However, the two knights part did not make sense in any case. Among Chaldea's group, only Matthew was a knight-type servant. Whether it was Da Vinci who came this time or Pamilia who did not come this time, they were not knight-type servants. One of the knights was Matthew, so who was the other knight? Was it a mole from the enemy? Or was it a new servant summoned by Gadazzi? Or was it a lone servant? Wait a minute, there are knights in your village? Compared to Wu Ming's silent frown, Hassan was much more direct and directly expressed his doubts. Because of the continuous deaths of his compatriots, Hassan was full of malice toward the knights. Previously, when Hugo Hassan faced Wu Ming, he was filled with disgust. If it weren't for the fact that he spent a little physical effort, Hugo Hassan wouldn't talk to Wu Ming so amiably and walk together. Wu Ming proved that he was a good knight, but this was only for Wu Ming alone. For other knights, Hassan still maintained his previous attitude, extreme disgust. Yes, the two knights and Lady Cursed Wrist escorted the compatriots who fled from the holy city to the village, so Lady Cursed Wrist left them behind. The woman saw the displeasure on Hugo Hassan's face and quickly explained, fearing that Hugo Hassan would be angry. At the same time, Wu Ming put his hand on Hassan's shoulder and said to Hassan in a voice so small that the woman in front of him could not hear it. Don't be angry, let's see the situation first. After all, Wu Ming should be more anxious. Unknown people mixed in with Gadazzi, how could Wu Ming not be anxious? However, no matter what, he had to remain calm. Anger would spoil things. Then, madam, can you take us to see the two knights? Maybe the two knights you mentioned are people I know. Wu Ming had a sincere smile on his face as he looked at the woman. Okay. The woman blushed slightly and nodded. Wu Ming was then looked down upon by Hassan. Wu Ming expressed that he was also very helpless. As a Round Table cowherd, a member of the Knights of the Round Table, Wu Ming's appearance was naturally online. It was not that Wu Ming deliberately flirted with her. Wu Ming was completely unjustly implicated, however, Hassan would not be so considerate of Wu Ming. He only knew that Wu Ming had just molested his compatriot. After the farce, the woman took Wu Ming and Hassan to a rather simple house. Although it was simple compared with other houses, it was actually luxurious enough. It may be because this house was more luxurious than other houses, so it was arranged for Gadazzi and the others to live in. This is it, Sir Villo, Sir Hundred Faces, the woman said respectfully to Wu Ming and Hundred Faces. Well, you don't have to worry about us. Go to your work first, Hassan said. Although it was not a village, Hassan was also a local, so she clearly knew that the villagers had things to do during the day. In a chaotic world, it was impossible to have leisure time. Only sleeping time at night could be counted as rest time. The woman did have something to do. After saying goodbye to Wu Ming and Hassan, she left. Master Chaldea's servant is a knight? After the woman left, Hassan looked at Wu Ming. Wu Ming did not tell Hassan the specific situation, just told him that he hoped to find Chaldea's master. Hassan did not ask much about Chaldea's master that Wu Ming said. So now, Hassan was slightly surprised to know that the person Wu Ming was looking for was a knight-type servant. Tachika's servant is a sub-servant possessed by Galahad, so it is not wrong to say that Matthew is a knight. Wu Ming explained to Hassan. One of the two knights should be Matthew, but I have no clue about the other one. Wu Ming frowned. In other words, is it an enemy? Hassan's body tensed up and looked at the house in front of him with hostility. It's not certain whether it is a knight of the holy city. Don't rush to a conclusion. Wu Ming shook his head. That's true. Although Hassan said so, the vigilance of his body still did not weaken. As an assassin, he would not relax his vigilance because it's not certain because it would kill him quickly. Let's go in and have a look. Wu Ming said and walked in. At this time, a voice suddenly came from behind the two. Senior Villo? Wu Ming was happy when he heard the voice. It was Matthew's voice. Sure enough, Gadazzi and Matthew came to this village. When Wu Ming was about to turn his head, Hassan, who turned his head ahead of Wu Ming, exclaimed, "It's you?" Turning his head, Wu Ming looked at Mashu, who was smiling awkwardly, and Hassan, who had an angry look on his face. However, there was one thing that he could still see, and that was that there seemed to be some misunderstanding between the Hundred Faces Hassan and Gadazzi. Right, the desert. Wu Ming suddenly remembered what Gadazzi told him about what happened in the desert. They met Hassan, the man in black who kidnapped Pharaoh Nitocles, and they scared him away with Matthew's shield. Although the other party thought that Matthew was a holy city knight and retreated. But this was not the point. The point was that Hassan, the man in black who retreated, was Hassan. So, this grudge had already been formed. Well, I should have explained it to Hugo Hassan first. At this time, a sister-like voice came from the house behind Wuming and Hassan. Ah, isn't this the villa? You found us so quickly. Wuming looked back and saw Mona Lisa, wearing blue and red clothes and holding a mechanical staff, standing at the door. Da Vinci? Wuming was not surprised, but now the focus was not on Da Vinci but on the angry Hassan. As if he couldn't feel the anxious atmosphere at the scene, Da Vinci smiled and corrected Wuming's name. It's Da Vinci. The serious atmosphere was broken in an instant, and Matthew was a little overwhelmed. Even Hassan looked at Da Vinci speechlessly. But Da Vinci's help was good, and Wuming seized the opportunity to hold Hassan's shoulder and said to Hassan, "Anyway, let's go into the house first." Hassan of the 100 Faces nodded. She compromised. After all, she couldn't beat Wuming. Chapter 746. Although the house looked quite simple from the outside, Wuming found an unusual scene when he came into the room. In a room similar to a living room, the windows that were developed and transformed captured the light, filling the living room with light. The walls were dyed white, and Wuming, who had a good sense of smell, realized that it was modern paint. The floor was not land but some marble-like stone bricks. There were neat and obvious gaps between the stone bricks, and there was no doubt that it was just laid. There was nothing extra in the neat living room, only a wooden table that served as a coffee table and 2 wooden chairs that looked like modern wooden sofas. Wuming and Hassan sat on one of the wooden chairs, Matthew and Da Vinci sat on the other wooden chair, and the 4 of them looked at each other silently. Hassan stared at Matthew. Matthew lowered his head and looked embarrassed. Da Vinci kept smiling and did nothing, and Wuming looked at the room. It can't be helped, such a modern design that is not in line with this era. I'm afraid only Da Vinci can do it. In other words, only Da Vinci would be bored enough to renovate a temporary house, and it seems that the renovation is not complete yet. After all, I'm a genius, I can't help but fix a house like this. Da Vinci explained to Wuming, who was looking around. Wuming looked at Da Vinci helplessly, then asked, "By the way, where did Tachika go?" After being invited into the house by Da Vinci, Wuming did not see Gadazzi. After using his spiritual perception, Wuming found that Gadazzi was indeed not there. She and Cursed Wrist Hassan went to help the villagers, so they are not here, Da Vinci explained with a smile. Not only did Gadazzi go to help the villagers but so did Matthew. When he met Matthew outside the house, Matthew was holding a pile of hay in his hands. Now the hay was put in a room in the house by Matthew. In other words, only Da Vinci is slacking off, right? Wuming stated the truth rather calmly. Mashu, who lowered her head in embarrassment, raised her head and nodded. "Oh, Mama," Da Vinci laughed. Leonardo da Vinci himself almost transformed this house into his own workshop. Matthew complained as a Chaldea employee. Cough cough. "Dear Villo, is there anything you don't understand? The genius Da Vinci will personally explain it to you for free." Da Vinci, who realized that he would lose face if he continued, decisively changed the topic. Although Gadazzi wasn't here, Leonardo da Vinci could explain it clearly. "So, what exactly happened since you left for the Holy City? Please tell me about it." Yes, Da Vinci's lecture is starting. With that said, Da Vinci took out a pair of glasses from somewhere and put them on his eyes. Gadazzi, Matthew, and Da Vinci arrived at the Holy City in Da Vinci's car. After identifying themselves, the gatekeeper of the Holy City said, "Please wait for a moment, I need to report." However, in the process of waiting, the holy selection happened to begin. Gadazzi and her party naturally couldn't tolerate Gawain's behavior of slaughtering the refugees, so they fought against Gawain and the Solemn Knights. However, Matthew and Da Vinci naturally couldn't rescue the refugees alone, but fortunately Gadazzi and the others had help. They happened to meet Knight Lucius, who had helped Gadazzi and the others in the desert, and Drunk Smoke Hassan, who wanted to sneak into the Holy City. In the end, Drunk Smoke Hassan risked his life to help Gadazzi and the others stop Gawain. After Lucius and Matthew jointly repelled the Solemn Knights, they successfully bought time for the refugees to escape. Hearing this, the atmosphere around 100 Faces Hassan seemed to be lonely. "Is that so? Drunk Smoke Hassan has already left." After that, 100 Faces Hassan didn't say anything else. By the way, 100 Faces Hassan also put on the skull mask that Wuming had returned to her. Anyone could tell that 100 Faces Hassan was in a bad mood, so Da Vinci continued to explain. "According to Drunk Smoke Hassan's instructions, we covered the refugees and came here. We also encountered Cursed Wrist Hassan, who was sneaking in the mountains. Then, Da Vinci had that was close. In the end, we were almost caught by a knight we had never seen before. It was really thrilling. That knight should be Lancelot. Other than Drunk Smoke Hassan and Knight Lucius, is there no one else? Woming asked. After all, Azrael must have fought with Gawain, and Lancelot also said that he encountered the green-haired angel. Did she not appear in front of Gadazzi and the others? The knight who was chasing us was indeed attacked, but because it was too far away, we didn't see the situation clearly. Matthew took over Da Vinci and explained to Woming. Matthew and Gadazzi didn't see it clearly. Woming believed it, but Da Vinci might have seen it. Woming looked at Da Vinci vaguely, and then Woming found Da Vinci looking at him with a smile. Then Woming calmly moved his head away. Maybe Da Vinci saw it. Woming had a feeling that Da Vinci's smile just now contained something. Azrael appeared in front of Da Vinci, and Da Vinci also knew that Azrael was Woming's subordinate. If she saw Azrael, then it was normal to guess that it was Woming. However, judging from Matthew's performance, Azrael did not seem to appear in front of Gadazzi and the others so far. Although Da Vinci vaguely knew, this was in line with Woming's warning to Azrael, don't show up easily. Then Azrael should be around now. Woming thought so and looked out the window. At this moment, a feather fell from the window. Woming's eyes suddenly shrank. It was a feather of the skywing species. Sure enough, Azrael was nearby. Woming vaguely glanced at Hassan and Matthew, but neither of them noticed it. Then Woming vaguely looked at Da Vinci again and found that Da Vinci was looking at him with a smile. This guy definitely noticed. Woming's expression did not change at all, but he was shocked. I'm a genius. Da Vinci cast such a meaningful look at Woming. Then, Da Vinci did not care about Woming and continued his speech. Among the casualties this time, only smoke-drunk Hassan was a follower. As for the ordinary people, there were more than a dozen refugees who were not saved by us at the beginning. Most of the refugees were saved. Although Lancelot almost caught up with them in the end, the overall situation was not that bad. Seeing that Da Vinci did not mean to expose Woming, Woming simply did not care. At this point, the story of Chaldea's party was over, and the next thing was what happened now. It's been hard on you, Matthew, Woming said to Matthew. Although Da Vinci didn't say it that hard, Woming didn't think that Matthew and the others had it easy. Hey. No, in fact, I didn't have it hard, but Mr. Lucius had it harder. Miss Hassan even sacrificed her life because of this. Matthew said and stopped. Hassan, who seemed to have a good relationship with smoke-drunk Hassan, was still here. It was not good to talk too much. Looking at Hassan, who did not move, Matthew was relieved. By the way, why didn't I see Lucius? Woming asked. It seemed that the second knight follower was Lucius. However, Woming's sixth sense told him that the identity of Lucius was not simple. Chapter 747. Is it Mr. Lucius? If it's him, he should be helping the villagers now. Matthew pondered. After all, Mashu was separated from her beloved senior, and it was unlikely that she would know the location of Lucius. He's in the village. I'll look for him. Don't worry about me. Woming greeted and disappeared. Woming was also a follower, so naturally he could still do spiritual transformation. Only Da Vinci, Matthew and Hundred Faces Hassan were left in the room. It seems that there are some contradictions between us, Da Vinci said to Hundred Faces Hassan with a cheeky smile. Why was that? Because after Woming left, Hundred Faces Hassan's eyes had been fixed on Da Vinci and Matthew. Unlike Da Vinci, Matthew was a good boy. In any case, in the desert they did hinder Hundred Faces Hassan's work. Therefore Mashu wanted to apologize to him. That Miss Hayakuga about what happened in the desert, Mashu said apologetically. However, before Matthew could finish, Hundred Faces Hassan interrupted Matthew. No need to say more. Because of the mask, Matthew couldn't see Hundred Faces Hassan's face, nor could he see her eyes. He only knew that Hundred Faces Hassan's voice was quite cold. Matthew was quite nervous. In her opinion, this negotiation was messed up. At the same time, Hundred Faces Hassan continued to speak. You did hinder me from kidnapping the Sun King's pharaoh, but this time you saved my compatriots and we're even. Matthew was taken aback. Although Hundred Faces Hassan's voice was still cold, the words he said gave Matthew warmth. But Miss Smoke-Drunk Hassan, Matthew was speechless. In the end, they didn't save Smoke-Drunk Hassan. In the end, they relied on Smoke-Drunk Hassan's cover to successfully leave. Although it seemed that drunk Smoke Hassan was trying to cover for the refugees to leave, Matthew and the others were also beneficiaries. Matthew felt guilty for abandoning his allies and escaping. That is drunk Smoke's choice. I respect her choice. At the same time, I will also believe in the people she trusts. That's great, Miss Yagami. Thank you for your forgiveness and trust. Matthew was pleasantly surprised. No matter who was in the wrong, Matthew would be happy to see whoever apologized first and reached a peaceful ending. Alright, reunion. Da Vinci, who had already seen through everything, celebrated with a smile. However, at this moment, the eyes of the 100 Faces Hassan's skull mask glowed. However, that doesn't mean that I've forgiven you for what you did to me in the desert. At that time, the 100 Faces Hassan took the initiative to retreat when he saw the pattern on Matthew's shield. This was a nicer way to put it, but a less pleasant way to put it was scared away. This was a matter of Hassan's reputation. He had to get it back. This was a matter of the reputation of the first Hassan who founded the Old Man of the Mountain cult. Well, he was definitely not worried about being cut down. Matthew was taken aback and then he put on a look that looked like he was about to cry. The atmosphere instantly became cold again. Click. At this moment, the door opened. I heard from the villagers that assassin is here? Where is he? Where is he? The voice was heard before the person was seen. After the voice reached everyone's ears, the red-haired figure came into view. Gadotsi, who walked into the room, looked around and did not notice the atmosphere at all. Master, please pay attention to the atmosphere. Cursed Wrist Hassan, who came with Gadotsi and was still standing outside the door, reminded her softly and kindly. After Cursed Wrist Hassan's reminder, Gadotsi also realized the problem. Then Gadotsi touched her red hair and looked at everyone with a laugh. Wow. Did I miss something? This made 100 Faces Hassan shake his head helplessly. With such a master around, he could not maintain the cold atmosphere. However, this was a pretty good master. On the other side, Wuming, who was missed by Gadotsi, was now wearing the silver-white armor and walking in the village. Because the news that a good knight who knew the two knights had come to the village, the villagers did not make a fuss about Wuming. This was also the reason why Wuming did not change his clothes. An armored knight with a known identity was better than an unknown person wearing ordinary clothes. The latter might cause trouble, so Wuming simply did not change his clothes. Moreover, he was now summoned as a Villo knight. Ignoring the curious gazes of the villagers, Wuming kept a smile and walked around the village a little, but he did not find the Lucius that Matthew mentioned. Coincidentally, Wuming found the woman he met at the entrance of the village. Hence, Wuming hurriedly walked up to the woman with the standard smile of a round table bull, Knight of the Knights, and started a conversation with the woman. We meet again, ma'am. I have something to ask. I don't know if it will cause you any trouble. No? No. How could it be? The woman blushed and nodded. I want to ask where Knight Lucius is. He might be an acquaintance of mine. I want to talk to him, but I don't see him in the village, so I want to ask. Wuming asked in an extremely gentle tone, which made the woman feel a little smug. Ma'am? Wuming responded and pulled the woman back to reality. Yes. Okay, Mr. Villo. The Knight Lucius you are looking for is now at the cliff over there. The woman pointed to the direction Wuming. Thank you, ma'am. Wuming thanked her. Although he did not have any sleeves, he still left like a cloud. After knowing the destination, Wuming walked over slowly. Wuming always felt that Lucius was not the other party's real name but a fake name. As for why, Wuming could only answer, intuition. Wuming's intuition was always accurate, so Wuming believed in his intuition. The woman did not lie to Wuming. Sure enough, Wuming found a knight wearing a white hooded cloak on the edge of a cliff. This Lucius took off the hood, and the silver-white ponytail fluttered behind Lucius. Although the back was facing, the silver hair gave people a feeling that the opposite party was very good-looking. Seeing this scene, Wuming did not have any other feelings, only sure enough. It's really you, Minister Bedivere? Chapter 748. After hearing Wuming's voice, the knight who called himself Lucius was stunned. Then he slowly turned his head. A delicate and pretty face that didn't look like a knight entered Silent Cry's eyes. Sir Villo? He said in an inexplicable tone with excitement. Looking at this familiar face, coupled with the way the other party addressed him, Wu Ming was completely sure that the other party was the knight he was familiar with and also witnessed the end of King Arthur, Bedivere. I didn't expect to see you here. Bedivere knelt on one knee and said to Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming controlled his spirit force to pull up Bedivere, who had not yet knelt down. You're always like this. I remember I said more than once that the person you need to kneel to is my king. Wu Ming shook his head helplessly. Because of Wu Ming's strength, reputation, and the knight's awe of Wu Ming, plus the relationship between Wu Ming and Artoria, Bedivere would want to salute Wu Ming every time he saw Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming also told Bedivere more than once or every time, there was no need to treat him like this. Although Bedivere would agree verbally, it would still be the same the next time they met. It had become a habit. However, seeing Bedivere like this made Wu Ming quite nostalgic. Yes, I understand, Sir Villo. Bedivere stood up and replied. But it was estimated that he would forget again next time. You, on the other hand, should have already predicted my arrival. In the end, you still put on a very surprised look. Wu Ming teased. However, Bedivere shook his head. No, how could it be? Although I knew about your news from Miss Fujimaru, and I did think about the scene of meeting you, I didn't expect to meet you at this moment. After all, from the information he learned from Gadatsi, Wu Ming should still be in the Sky Fortress summoned from another world, a Bont. He didn't expect a Bont to be able to move, and move so fast that he could meet Wu Ming in these mountains. Wu Ming chuckled. Then, with a casual point of his finger, 2 stone stools appeared on the spot. Sit down and talk. Wu Ming sat on one of the stone benches and looked at Bedivere. Yes. Bedivere, like obeying the words of his boss, sat on the stone bench next to Wu Ming. The two looked into the distance together. The beautiful sky made people forget to go back. However, this did not prevent Wu Ming and Bedivere. How much do you know about my king? Wu Ming asked without looking back. Bedivere was silent for a few seconds and then replied. Everything. After saying that, Bedivere lowered his head in guilt. Hearing Bedivere's inexplicable answer, Wu Ming didn't have the slightest bit of confusion. On the contrary, he had already understood the whole story. The holy sword was not returned to the lake sprite, so King Arthur did not die. Without the holy sword, he picked up the holy spear and finally became the king of the undead walking on the earth, the Lion King, and came to this singularity. In the story of King Arthur, it was Knight Bedivere who was responsible for returning the holy sword. In addition, Bedivere did not respond to the Lion King's summon, so the matter naturally happened to Bedivere. You came here because you want to return the holy sword to my king. Wu Ming thought of the information provided by Da Vinci. They met the help of Lucius, who wanted to sneak into the holy city at the gate of the holy city. What was the purpose of sneaking into the holy city? Naturally, it was impossible to assassinate the Lion King. Combined with Bedivere's identity, only returning the holy sword was in line with what he wanted to do. Yes, you are right, Sir Villo. I must return the holy sword to my king. This is my sin, my responsibility. Bedivere's expression looked somewhat guilty. Looking at the guilty Bedivere, Wu Ming was attracted by Bedivere's right hand. Originally, Bedivere's right arm should have been empty, but now there was an extra silver white arm. With Wu Ming's knowledge at such a close distance, he could naturally see what the extra silver arm was. It was the holy sword that changed its shape and effect. This is Merlin's technique. Without guessing, Wu Ming knew that it was Merlin's doing. Wu Ming once again thought of Merlin's expression when he told him about the Uruk singularity. That despicable face made it clear that Merlin must be up to something again. And Bedivere was probably one of the things that Merlin did. Wu Ming even thought that he was one of the things that Merlin did. You're right. Because His Excellency Merlin couldn't leave the Forbidden Tower, he helped me inlay this arm and guided me here. Bedivere held his right arm with a face full of responsibility. However, immediately after, Bedivere relaxed. However, since you are here, Sir Villo, I don't think I'm needed. I don't think so. Without waiting for Bedivere to finish, Wu Ming directly interrupted him. Wu Ming looked at Bedivere's somewhat surprised eyes and said, whether as my king's subject or as an atonement, you have the need to return the holy sword to my king in person. Bedivere lowered his head guiltily. I chose the wrong path again. I'm sorry, Sir Villo. However, Wu Ming just smiled. With me helping you from behind, it'll be fine as long as you have the courage to try. This was one of the reasons why the Knights of the Round Table admired Wu Ming. He could always help the knights when they were on the wrong path. Not only for the knights, but Wu Ming was also the same for Artoria. If it weren't for Wu Ming being weak at that time and being sent away by Morgan Le Fay, the Arthur dynasty would not have collapsed, but would have been pulled back by Wu Ming. Yes. Servillo, thank you very much. Bedivere smiled. With Wuming, he seemed to have a backbone, as if he had 100% confidence in saving the king. The British silver dragon not only guarded the territory of Britain, but also the hearts of the people in the territory. By the way, this is for you, Wuming said. Golden ripples appeared beside him, and a bottle of red potion was spat out from the ripples. This is. Bedivere caught the red potion spat out from the golden ripples with a puzzled look. He couldn't understand what it was. If it was Merlin, he should be able to understand it. Bedivere thought so. A potion to restore vitality. Your body is full of holes. Although it can't cure the symptoms, at least it can make you feel better. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.